Good evening. I'd like to call the November 15th, 2016 Oak Harbor City Council meeting to order. We have got a long package of information here tonight, a lot of items on our agenda. We'll start off with an invocation. Our very own Councilman Jim Campbell will lead us in the invocation, and I'll follow with a Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join if you'd like.
Heavenly Father, we come before you tonight so grateful for this day, grateful for the fact that you brought us all together safely, grateful for the fact that you give us the opportunity to serve the citizens of Oak Harbor. Lord, we pray for our deployed. We ask that you be with each and every one of them. Keep them safe, keep them out of harm's way. Please be with all the citizens of the city of Oak Harbor. Let them realize their dreams. Lord, as we get ready to go for this meeting tonight, we ask that everything goes smoothly. We ask that we get everything accomplished that you want us to get accomplished. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Jim. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Memorize the flag and the back.
I think about that.
It looks like we've got a full council this evening, so we're going to move right into item number one, approval of the agenda. Yes, Councilman Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion and second, Servadius and Campbell to approve the agenda as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item number two, presentations. We have a presentation tonight under community presentations by Julie Langrock, Executive Director, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Island County. Welcome to the podium, Julie. If you've got somebody with you you'd like to introduce, go right ahead.
Okay, well, I want to first thank you for having us tonight. I've been Executive Director since April, and so this is all new to me. I like getting out and kind of telling you about the agency. I know you've heard about us before. Tonight I kind of want to give you individual demographics from our agency from the past year, and also show you a national video that just kind of shows you the work that we're doing nationally in communities. So I'm really excited to have board members here. I have Lynn Bixler and Chris Johnson, and I've got my staff extraordinaire. I wish I had others. They're out making matches, but I've got Kathy Kaltenbach, who is our match coordinator in Oak Harbor. So you'll see her in the Oak Harbor schools. If you're out and about, say hi to Kathy. So Kathy, you started April as well. So we had worked previously together, and I'm delighted to be working again with Kathy. So I am going to just push the space bar. And we'll just watch the national video first. This is Changing How Kids Grow Up in America.
Every day, over 15,000 kids try drugs and alcohol for the first time.
1 in 3 teenage girls become pregnant by age 20.
1 child drops out of school every 30 seconds.
Kids that drop out of school are 8 times more likely to be arrested.
1 in 36 Hispanic adults are incarcerated.
1 in 25 African American adults are incarcerated.
12 million children in the U.S. live below the poverty line.
So I think we all agree we're seeing more and more of the need in our community. We're certainly seeing it at the agency with the children we serve. You know, the income level is going down, homelessness is going up. So I just wanted to share, again, the last year demographics. We had served 143 Island County children. Of these children served, 41% were boys, 59% were girls. 60% are on free and reduced lunch. That's not a mandated question that parents have to answer, so this might be askew a little bit. I would guess that it's probably a higher percentage than that. The past year, the breakdown of volunteers that we've had 47% of our volunteers are high school bigs. They have this wonderful opportunity to be a big. It looks great on college applications. They do a tremendous job going over to the elementary schools. In Coopville, they're matched with kids at the middle school as well. We have 36% of our bigs are in the military, so we owe them just a great deal of gratitude for their service. We love to pair them with kids that may be thinking about a career in the military. Makes a great match, and see that there's options out there. 20% work in a variety of other fields and occupations. One of the things we do is we do a pre and a post survey with our littles. So going in, we have a kind of baseline test. We're able to tell that 92% of our littles report better peer relationships after being matched with their mentor. And 93% of them report a higher self-esteem in school and in their community. We have our wonderful match support specialists. That's kind of a difference with mentoring agencies. Ours are employed to continually monitor the match with regular phone calls or in-person visits, just to make sure that the littles are safe and our bigs are safe as well. So we kind of have that balance of checking in on both of them. I think all of us in this room know why it matters is just that children that are facing adversity become responsible, productive citizens who are able to achieve lifelong success. And that's going to benefit their families, it's going to benefit our community, it's going to benefit our schools and our businesses in the future. So the one thing I like to point out, because some people are surprised that we actually have two different programs. We have a school-based and a community-based. And the differences are community-based, it's a little more flexible. They can meet 2 to 3 times a month. And that's the program where you can take your little to the movies, to the beach, you can run errands. Some of our littles report the best thing they like to do with their bigs is go to Home Depot and shop the wood aisle. I mean, so it's not, you don't have to do Disneyland. It's the simple things that these kids really like to do. School-based, you're going to meet an hour a week at a local elementary school, and that's going to be the same day and the same time every week. You're going to do homework together. You can show up for lunch. So there's flexibility with that. You can go play outside. I like to point out that there's absolutely no charge for youth or the bigs in our program. And our operating budget comes from our individual fundraising. This is a great time for me to make a plug that Festival of Trees is coming up December 2nd and Teddy Bear Breakfast December 3rd. So events like that, we do Bowl for Kids' Sake. We have individual donations, and we have grants from wonderful foundations like Island Thrift that are very supportive. So the other reason I'm here is to let you know we have 45 kids right now on our waiting list waiting for bigs. So anytime you're out in the community and you meet somebody that you think would be a good big, send them our way. Have them stop by the office anytime. We will meet with them and give them the program rundown and see if that's a good fit for them. But it is flexible. You can do, I think some people get scared away by, oh, I just don't have the time, but there are other options. So I just want to thank you guys for your support, and by working together, our efforts in serving the children of the community are maximized. So thanks for being so supportive.
Councilman Campbell has a
Yes.
Could you give us the definition, a better definition of littles and bigs?
Okay, so our littles are going to be the children in our program that are going to be mentored. So their ages 6 to 14.
Okay,
They're the children that are facing adversity, whose either counselors are referring to them to us, or their parents are referring.
Okay.
Our bigs are the adult volunteers or the school-based volunteers.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Mrs. Langrock, I would like to thank you and your staff for the leadership you're providing for the big brothers, big sisters in Island County. Through your leadership, you provide a mentor support for our children to help them, make them become good citizens, build their self-esteem. And I did that before when we arrived in Oak Harbor. Before Big Brothers, Big Sisters, it was the North Star Youth Bureau, and I volunteered as Big Brother. It was a rewarding experience, and I encourage adults in our community to volunteer as Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for your family support.
Well said, well said. Anyone else? Thank you, Mrs. Langenbrod.
Thank you very much for
Nice
having
job.
us.
Nice job, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to citizen comment period. This is item number 3 on the agenda. Citizens may comment on subjects of interest not listed on the agenda or items listed on the consent agenda. To ensure comments are recorded properly, please state your name clearly into the microphone. Please limit comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time. So, anybody for citizen comment? Going once? Twice? Okay, we'll move on to consent agenda. How would if, yes, Councilman Campbell?
I'd like to pull 4C because 4E, I've got a question about it.
Okay. Yes, Councilman Olmberg.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'd like to pull 4B regarding the minutes.
So we got B and E pulled. Anyone else? Okay, the remaining items will get approved then, just as presented, and we'll go back to Councilman Campbell for item number 4E.
I'd like someone to explain or someone to tell me the relationship 4E has to 8C. They're almost worded identical.
Mayor, council members. Quick answer to that is they're both related to the Deception Pass Bridge 10-inch water line. The one that's on the consent agenda allows me the authority to sign on change orders under $65,000 to keep the project moving along. I would report back to council any changes of that nature. The other one is actually an extension of a contract with KBA, who's doing the construction management for the very same project. And originally we thought the project was going to be 30 days. There's been some changes, so it's we've increased the time on it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stoll, our city engineer. Okay, and then we'll go to, back up to item 4B. Mr. Olmberg?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, if you refer to the agenda bill for that item, the motion for the friendly amendment is a slight typo in there. The document that we all have says on the first paragraph, second part of that, it says that any expenditure of the 10% contingency shall be assigned, et cetera, and that language has been changed or should be changed, as I mentioned with the Nikki, that it should be that any expenditure of the 10% contingency shall be signed by the delegated signatory authority of the Oak Harbor Mayor Bob Severance. Sorry about that. So it's a slight twist of words to have the correct meaning. So it should read that any expenditure of the 10% contingency shall be signed by the delegated signatory authority for the city of Oak Harbor by Mayor Bob Severance.
Okay. So we have those corrected, is that correct now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Nothing additional needed there, so we'll move on to item number 5. Did you? Okay.
I was just going to move if you wanted a motion to approve those.
Oh, I don't think, well, I guess they'll be approved as presented. Yeah. Okay. Item number 5, Mayor, Council, and Staff comments. I'll start off by saying, keeping it brief, but I was honored and privileged to be invited to the A6 Intruder tribute dedication at the Museum of Flight, and Rhonda and I attended that on Labor Day, and there were several other Oak Harborites there and a lot of people who have been at NAS Whidbey. It's a beautiful dedication tribute that's there now right alongside of the A6. If you get a chance to go to the Museum of Flight, I would recommend you stop. You'll want to spend some time reading the information on that tribute. It's really beautiful. But having said that, I'll turn it over to council members. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended 2 Veterans Day celebration in Oak Harbor. One at the Oak Harbor High School Performing Arts Center. The celebration of Veterans Day was sponsored by the Navy League of the United States Oak Harbor Area Council. In that celebration, attended also by my colleagues, Mr. Rick Almberg, his wife, Mrs. Swasinger, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Servatis, and we were seated on the second row, right in front of the stage, and Mr. Almberg was at the end of the row, and there was this gentleman who's having a hard time, older gentleman, having a hard time going up to the stairs, and he was called to sit right on the level. But he couldn't hear, he continued to go up, and there was no seat available. As Mr. Almberg's kindness, he gave up his seat and his wife, and I call that random act of kindness.
Random act of kindness.
Thank you.
Very nice.
It's only the obvious thing to do.
Oh, yeah, good for you. Mr. Campbell?
Yes, I attended the same 2 veterans functions that Mr. Pagal was talking about. I've gone to a lot of those functions, a lot of Veterans Day things here in this town and other places. In this town, I'll keep it located to that. This year was the best I have ever seen. I get a little teary at times, and there was lots of times during this when they were talking and the tears were flowing. It was just magnificent. I also went to the Regency for their veterans things and was fortunate enough and liked it enough that they asked me to read the names of all the veterans at Regency, veterans and their wives. That, again, was very powerful. There's a lot of people that you could go up to Regency and just walk up and say thank you, and you've hit a veteran. There's lots of them there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. I too will comment on something from the Veterans Day program at the high school. Captain Midas, Commodore Midas, gave the keynote address, and he was commenting on the feedback that he's getting, and I think it's important for the community to hear this, from these squadrons and the folks that are coming from Hawaii. And I'm going to paraphrase his comments to the best of my ability, but he said in general they say it's not nearly as warm as where they are coming from, Hawaii, but the reception that they've received is the warmest that they've ever received from a community. It's as though they feel that they have done their entire service career here. So very much a testament to the city of Oak Harbor, also our surrounding neighbors, Anacortes, Coopville, wherever they might be residing, but we'll say it's Island County in general, I guess. Anacortes too gets a little prop there, but it was a really neat moment that he said it's just the overwhelming response that he's received. So that was a very nice kudos to hear from the Navy.
Thank you, Mr. Servadius. Anyone else? Yes, Councilman Munt.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to give a plug for Help House. you're hearing on the news right now that 1 out of 6 in Seattle won't have a meal. Fortunately, we have a more active community, but there'll be probably close to 500 food baskets. So you have $1, $5, can of peas or whatever, they could sure use your help. Let's not have any family not have a nice dinner. And this is a full dinner. We are fortunate that it's not pieces of chicken and stuff. They either, if it's a homeless person or limited, you know, they get a fresh turkey roll, or they get a whole turkey, and they get the pumpkin pie and the, you know, the filling and the rolls and the potatoes, and it really is unique for our community, but it's also a time where we can help our neighbors out. So if there's anything that you can do. Plus, this is a way for them to stock up of their non-perishables for January. Everybody does a lot for Thanksgiving and Christmas. January, February comes, it's cold, it's rainy, no one gets out, and their stock supplies can get empty. So any of that money, if it's not used now, it will certainly be used in January and February. So please remember your neighbor, or maybe people you don't even know, but this is our community. Let's take care of our people. Had a lot of time to cruise the TV, and I was so proud to see PBY on the TV. Excellent. I believe it was King 5 News about their Pearl Harbor, the only one in the state, exhibit with artifacts and letters and testimonies from different people. That was really nice. It was on their link. Also, I will attend an MRSC, a Missile Research Center meeting on the 2nd of December in Seattle. And then on the 9th will be AWC, and we'll be hashing down the preferences for the cities and towns on what to hit the legislators with. So this is our time. I know that our city administrator's been working on it, but if you have any comments, whether I'll let him know, let me know, but this is the time to have our voice heard. It's an important year. There's a lot of infrastructure everybody needs help with. The unfunded mandates, you know how slim our budget is, and it isn't because we haven't been conservative and frugal with it, but just a lot of demands, and we need support and not have them keep taking our money, the shared revenues. I don't know, have we gotten any from the marijuana sales yet that we're supposedly sharing? Okay. For a while it was a long time, and none of the cities were reporting any of that back, and that's where our law enforcement comes in, extra law enforcement and training for that. So, and I also attended the A6 tribute, and what a testimony to NAS would be and our town for supporting during the Vietnam War and after, and it was, and Stephen Kuntz giving the talk, and I didn't realize we had a A6 POW for 5.5 years in China, and he never broke. It was very, very interesting, and tied everything, today in and whatever. It was very, very good. So I was privileged to be there. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Councilor Wassinger?
Thank you, Mayor. I was fortunate for me, not so much for Mayor Severance, to fill in for the mayor and meet with a Cub Scout troop last week at the Elks Lodge. Cub Scout Pack 4099. Cub Scouts, they're a group of elementary school age boys, and I went as a local government official, elected official, even though I was appointed. I did explain that to them. To talk about what I do and answer any questions they had in order for them to earn a Beacon of Light badge to move on to become Boy Scouts. There were about 12 young men there, and I just wanted everyone to know how impressed I was with their insight, with their knowledge, with their passion, to be honest, about what I did. And they asked me some tough questions about the wastewater treatment plant, which I really wasn't expecting. I don't know how much they're hearing at home or at school, but you know, and they talked about the treatment plant being in their park, their favorite park. So I got them really engaged with the park plan that we approved, and I want you all to know how excited they were when I mentioned things like a splash park or new playground equipment being in that master plan. And I told them that I would try and bring them some printouts of the plan. So I'll be probably asking Dr. Mirren or Mr. Powers here for maybe just a file that I can print out of the map of the park plan for those boys. They really cared, and they had some great ideas, and it was just a pleasure to meet with them. And it made me really excited for our future and those kids growing up and really taking an interest in what we do. So thank you to the Cub Scout Pack 4099.
Thank you, Councilor Wassinger. Word I got back is I don't have to worry about being invited back even. So, nice job. Nice job. Anyone? Councilor Heisen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a request of staff. I'm not sure who specifically to address this to, but I would really like to get a copy of our mission and vision and goals posted somewhere in council chambers so that we can be aware of them as we make decisions. So whoever would be in charge of that, please. Thanks.
That's great. Good. Okay, anyone else? Councilor Umberg.
I'm not going to say anything because I have a bet with Nikki that this is going to get over at by 8 o'clock. That's my comment.
You're not going to say anything, but you. Well, I actually normally this time of the year I tell my turkey stories, and I did to the senior center this last week, and I have a feeling some of those people are not going to enjoy their turkey dinner as much, so I won't tell it to the public, and we'll move the meeting along. How's that? Okay. We're on to item number 6, public hearings and meetings. To speak during a scheduled public hearing or meeting, please sign in on the sheet provided in the council chambers. To ensure comments are recorded properly, state your name clearly into the microphone. Please limit comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time to speak. And we'll start off with item number 6. Or no. Wait, we still have a clean water facility report to give, don't we? Whoop, I got a little ahead of myself there. Well, just remember what I just read because I won't read it again then. We'll clean water report, clean water facility project update. Yes.
I'll go ahead with the city administrator comments.
Yeah, I turn it over to you at this point. Jeez.
You really want to get out of here, don't you?
I'm not sure whether I'm trying to move it on too quick. Our city administrator, Dr. Merriman.
To help out, move it along. I'll just make it quick. Tomorrow we have a couple of meetings for council. One is at 1 o'clock down at the treatment plant for a tour of the facility down there. As I mentioned in my email today, dress for the weather and no open-toed shoes. We'll be meeting down, I think I mentioned the lobby by the stairs, and then we'll be going upstairs to get outfitted up and all our tour maps and everything at that point. But that'll be at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And then just a couple hours after that, we'll be reconvening here for our monthly workshop at 3 o'clock. And then moving on from there, we'll go to Brett and his update on the clean water facility.
Good evening. So we start with our clean water facility update. This is actually took a picture yesterday. We're getting used to having all kinds of big equipment show up and roaring, and this is actually picking up our existing generator and moving it. And one thing, of all the construction activities that are going on, we still have people operating these facilities as we do construction, and it requires quite a bit of coordination. This generator's an important piece of equipment. We couldn't have it down for very long, so we had to relocate it in one day. And we do a lot of that kind of thing down at the plant. So we have not only construction workers down there, but we actually have city employees that are doing their day-to-day jobs in the work too. So they're less obvious, but equally important. And as we move into the future, they're going to be operating the new facilities. So just keep them in mind too as we move forward. In terms of our recent activities, our design are essentially complete. We are providing bid period service right now for GMP number 11, and we have prepared a contract amendment for the Windjammer Park tasks, and that'll be later on our agenda. Construction, right now we're continuing to place concrete. We're ahead of schedule and below labor estimates as we did, and we'll give you a little more information on that later in one of our presentations. We have started demolition of the RBC plant. So we have we call it TikTok or the Talk out there making noise, and hopefully we'll get through that pretty quickly, but we have to bust up a lot of concrete. We are in the process of bidding GMP number 11, and we are beginning to work on mechanical electrical of GMP number 9. We're starting to get new faces working on the project and other activities that we're not used to. City Beach remains closed. The good news is we're coming to the end of it. We're hoping to reopen it. I hear it's going to be December 9th, but we're actually hoping to do it sooner than that. But we've got the pipeline almost installed and into it, so we're hoping to repave right after Thanksgiving and have the street reopened again. Funding, in our consent agenda, we did approve our loan agreement for our 2017. That's $44 million, so that'll be in process here pretty quick. And we have submitted the 2018 SRF application and have been doing some follow-up activities on that one. Upcoming major decisions. Tonight's a big night. We have both our GMP number 10, our Windjammer Park design amendment, the SRF loan amendment. Tomorrow we have our tour, as Dr. Merriman talked about. And we're talking about GMP number 11, and as of this morning, we've decided to push that bid date off and open it in the first week of December just to get better bidding. So that's probably going to be actually coming to us in early January. So we're going to push that one off. We're trying to bid too close before the holidays, and we want to make sure we get plenty of activity. So that's the latest news on that. We decided that this morning. Schedule-wise, we're pretty much on schedule, even though we're delaying that. That won't impact the schedule at all. Cost breakdown, this hasn't changed since last meeting. We're still at 24% expended. Unfortunately, though, we are processing a lot of bills, so we'll have some new information for you next meeting. As Dr. Merriman talked about, we do have the tour planned for tomorrow. You can come in the main lobby. We'll send you upstairs. We have a display area set up in our, we have sort of a public area, so we have lots of displays. We actually see the site from the window, and we'll make sure you have all your safety equipment ready to go. Do expect to walk around the site. It is more of a gravel surface out there, so it's not, and we do have to wear sturdy shoes. Please no high heels, and we'll provide you with all the safety equipment you need. Public outreach, we have our, actually today we have new project updates in the mail. We're mailing out an update to all citizens in the city. So look for that in your mailbox. Other than that, we have our normal contact information, oakharborcleanwater.org for our website. You can call us at our 914-7000 number. We get quite a bit of people want to get hold of us at treatmentplant@oakharbor.org. We do have community drop-in hours every other Monday, but people just seem to drop in whenever they want to, and actually they catch a lot of us out by the fence anymore. So that's been more of our drop-in time. We do talk to a lot of people out looking at the project. Any questions?
Questions, Council?
Thank you.
Brett, why don't you tell us about the Christmas lights?
Oh, yes. We have our clean water facility. I don't like to start celebrating Christmas until after Thanksgiving, but we flipped the switch, so we actually have our crane lit up, so when you walk out tonight after the meeting, you can see the lights. The guys, I told them I wanted lights for Christmas, and they got a little carried away, but it is fun.
Councilor Wassinger.
My daughters actually thought that a carnival was coming. That's what they asked me last night as they looked out the window and saw the lights. They said, "Carnival." I said, "No."
Why don't we start a treatment plant?
Councilor Umber.
Thank you, Mayor. It's my understanding that Hoffman Construction has agreed to defer about 50% of the cost of putting those lights up, and their crew
Yes,
put
we
them up.
split
Is
the
that
cost,
correct?
yeah.
So thank you, Hoffman Construction, wherever you are. It really looks nice. You know, it does look like a carnival down there.
Councilor Servadius.
Same. I thought Hoffman had picked up the entire bill, and I see Trevor T sitting back there, so I was even more excited. That's a lot of lights. My kids actually pointed that out to me, so thank you.
Yeah, and
Hoffman.
their LED are also, I hate to see the electric bill. We do pay that directly, but we got low impact lights.
Oh, good. Anyone else? Thank you, Brett. Nice job. Okay, now we are at item number 6A. And we will give the public a chance to ask questions. Mr. Powers, Development Services Director.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I think this will be a rather quick item for the council in keeping with Mr. Almberg's imposed deadline of 8 p.m. The Model Homes Code amendment, we've talked to you about this at your workshop. I think the council seemed to receive this concept very well. Really what the item tonight, the purpose is to present to you the draft code, which would allow up to 9 model homes to be constructed in new subdivisions prior to the final plat improvements being complete and the plat accepted. So the background on this item, as you might recall, it came to us from a local developer request. They said, hey, we've seen this in another community. We think this is a great idea. We'd like for you to consider amending your code to allow model homes to be constructed before the plat is complete. It would allow them to use the models to determine customer preference and interest in particular types of homes. The problem with that concept right now under our existing code is that we allow only 1 home per parcel until such time as the final plat is recorded and those new lots are created. I mentioned that they referenced another code. You might say that we modeled this after the Mount Vernon code because we borrowed heavily from what they have in place right now. So again, as I've mentioned, the maximum number is set at 9 homes. There's also a percentage within the code, but the total number that you could achieve would be 9 homes. The permit issuance, there are some criteria, obviously, in order for that to be in effect. First and foremost, in terms of things which might be on your mind, stormwater facilities need to be in place. We need to have our life safety requirements met, so Chief Merrill and the police department and the fire department need to be able to get to those homes. Obviously, we need to have fire flow there. Necessary frontage improvements are in place. Water and sewer connections, it has to be obviously a sanitary facility for the time that's being used as a model. A couple of requirements in terms of what happens if for some reason the plat doesn't go forward. The model homes, there will be a covenant which is recorded that requires their removal if for some reason the plat is not completed and all of the public improvements aren't installed. And there is a financial security required as well, which is, sorry, a piece of that got lost. It's 150% of the estimated cost to remove the unit from the property. As you might recall, code amendments are governed by a particular chapter under the municipal code, chapter 1980. It's pretty straightforward. There are 2 criteria which are necessary to be met in order for the Planning Commission to recommend approval to you and then for you to approve a code amendment. First is it needs to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. Second is that the amendment must substantially promote the public health, safety, and welfare. Staff did our typical analysis on these types of things. We're able to answer yes to both of those questions for the Planning Commission. They conducted their public hearing on October 25th, concurred with our analysis, and forwarded a unanimous recommendation of approval to you of this draft code. So with that, your recommended action this evening then is that you conduct the public hearing and adopt ordinance number 1780. I'd be happy to help you with your questions.
Okay, first we'll open that public hearing and look to the audience if anybody's here. Like to speak to that? Going once, twice, okay, seeing none. Bring it back and turn it to the council. Councilman Olmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Powers, the $150% security for removing the buildings is in addition to bonding for uncompleted work within the plat if they want final plat approval, correct?
If they want final plat approval before they've completed
The rest
all
of the
the
work.
public improvements, yes, that provision of the code would still apply.
They do not need final plat approval to put in the models.
That's correct. And that's why we're putting this piece into place, is so that those homes can get started while they're still finishing up the site work.
Thank you very much.
Councilman Campbell.
Thank you. Did you say that there was some sort of formula on the number of model homes?
Yes, and I'm sorry, Mr. Campbell, it escaped me as I was
Yeah, I know there's
through.
9, but
It's actually, it's up to 20% of the total number of lots within the preliminary plat, but it's capped at 9.
Up to 20%.
okay.
So
Thank
whichever
you.
whichever number would be greater.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Council?
Just want to make sure that I read this correctly. So there, in addition to all of the other permitting fees and normal fees that are already set in place, this would be an additional 300 per model home that the city would collect? Is
That's
that
correct. Right.
Okay.
For this particular permit process and review process,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure I got it.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Powers, when I was reading this ordinance, I was thinking about the risk involved in building the model homes before the final plat is approved. The developer must be highly motivated and optimistic in selling the built model homes, up to 9 homes. I can think motivation, like more people coming into NAS would be. Is that one of the motivations?
I believe so, Mr. Pagao. Typically, we don't see a lot of spec homes built in Oak Harbor. They tend to be done more, for the end user themselves. But what this would allow would be for a developer and a builder to sort of move more into that realm. As also explained to us, it lets them get a couple different models on the ground, so that the potential customer has the chance to actually tour that home and see it in real life, as opposed to a virtual tour or looking at drawings.
That'd be good for the realtors also.
And the other thing that it does is again, it gets those homes underway while they're still completing the site improvements. And so potentially they can save a little bit of time in terms of actually selling those first homes.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Yes, Councilor Eisen.
I move to adopt ordinance number 1780.
Second.
Got a motion to adopt ordinance number 1780 as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Thank you,
Well
Mayor.
done. I'm happy to see this, actually. I think we're moving ahead. Okay, item number 6B is our 2017-2018 preliminary biennial budget. And we have our Finance Director, Patricia Stoll.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay. All right. So to start off, I just want to rehash where we've been and where we're headed. The budget to date meetings that have occurred, we had revenues presented, revenue estimates presented. The departments all presented their budgets during workshops. The budget presenting today is the draft final for the biennial period of 2017 to 2018. You'll have about 3.5 weeks before the final adoption of the budget hearing, which is on December 6th of 2016. I want to start with noting a few items that were part of the budget process. We budgeted the payroll with a 2% increase to both 2017 and 2018. Fringe budgets include a 6% increase to the medical in 17 and a 3% increase in 18. There was a 1.34% to PERS, and LEF, there was a 0.02% increase mandated by the state. All budgets were reviewed for trends. More cuts were made after the last presentation of the general budget. We tried to true up numbers and make some cuts to help with the budget balancing. We looked at reoccurring expenses versus one-time expenses. We'll go into that more when we get into the general fund.
The budget challenges, again, were the mandated expenditures, PERS and LEF. Labor negotiations are all up this year, PD, fire, and Teamsters for both Public Works and the Marina. City medical benefits, AWC estimated a 6% increase for 17. That's why I went ahead and included a 3% increase for 18, just for pure making sure we had enough there. Due to the ACA, Obamacare, which may or may not be an issue going forward, but was when we started this budget, the number of employees paid on call, seasonal and temporary, if they work over so many hours, they have to be offered insurance. We don't have to provide it if they don't want it, but we do have to offer it, and some have taken advantage of that. The paid on call in 2015 was an unknown requirement, so when we set the 2017-18 budget, we had to increase that. Public defense, the Mount Vernon versus ACLU required an increase for the judicial budget of about 140 each year based on prior to the previous budget. Actuals were that much higher. And to continue balancing future budgets with or without fund balance, there's more that needs to be looked at, but we'll talk about that later too. Positions that were added, after all of our cuts were done, there were no more additional positions added to the general fund. The only positions that were added were to rate-funded budgets and also due to construction, the increased requirements for those plants. We added 1 water system supervisor, 3 treatment plant operators, 2 in 2017, 1 treatment plant operator, 2 in 2018, and 1 stormwater inspection educator. Sustainability. This is just some ideas. Doug and I have been talking about this, and I just wanted to put some of this stuff out there. This is something that would need to be driven by mayor and council and administration. It's a plan, strategic plan, financial plan, or some sort of a plan that helps us going into the future with decisions made before we start the budget process. It would analyze your fiscal environment, where we stand, what kind of flexibility we have, what kind of other funding streams we have, service prioritization, and examining the base. That means looking at what services the city wants to provide versus what just doing the same thing, taking a hard look, making sure that we're providing the services that we need, and we're prioritizing what services are important to the city. Alternate service delivery, partnering, outsourcing, other ideas that could come up during that process. Economic development, which the mayor is currently working towards. Process efficiencies, utilizing technology, utilizing other ways to do things that may not be the way we currently do it, but ways to help increase efficiencies, which could reduce costs. Analyze costs beyond building new capital. When you build new capital, you have that outlay, but then you have the O&M cost afterwards. How do you plan for that? How do you make sure that you have enough funding in your funding stream to make sure you can cover that before you build the capital? Looking at more opportunities for grants, more than just grants for capital projects. There are grants out there for operating. Public safety is one idea. There's STOP grants out there that you potentially have in the past looked at and may look at for the future. That's just one idea. But there's many, many more ideas that will come up during the process, but I think for the benefit of the city, that needs to start right away. Doug's committed to making sure that gets going, and it would help during the budget process to make sure we're following the guidelines that are set and that are the best interest of the city. So I gave you a lot of paper. If you look at this piece of paper right here, it's that packet that had to have a binder clip on it because the staple wouldn't fit. I want to walk through what's in here, and then I'll go through some of these items in more detail. The first pages 2 through 5, and they're numbered, are the summary of all of the funds, the revenue, expense, surplus, deficit. And when you look at this report, there's actuals from 2011 to 2015, so you can see trend. There's the budget for 16, and then where we're currently at through September 30 of 16, how much of our budget that means, how much we budgeted versus how much we spent. 75% would be right on target. Anything above or below means our budget estimate was off or there was an unusual circumstance that changed. Then over on the right-hand side, I tried to demonstrate the estimated beginning fund balance at 17, what we show as our surplus or deficit in 17 and 18, and then what we estimate ending fund balance. All of the funds have a fund balance at the end. So we haven't tapped into beyond what we have available in our fund balance. Of course, we don't want to tap into our fund balance if we don't have to, but I just want to demonstrate that consideration was given. Then when you go to the next page 6, and I won't go into detail on this one until the end. There's a lot of slides that will cover this. And this is mainly for you to have for the next 3.5 weeks, if you feel the urge to go through it, or questions or come up when you're looking through this. I tried to put it in different ways so it would make it easier to analyze. So this one breaks apart all of the funds into 3 categories: personnel, operating, or capital outlay for 17 and 18 budget. Operating will include transfers out, operating expenses, and the interfund transfers, which are part of operating, but they're not like supplies or gas or utilities. So they're included in the operating. Then when you go to the next grouping, which is on page 8, that is the capital outlay request. Those go from pages 8 to 12. I was trying to think of the best way to present this to you, where we ended with capital and how it all is funded. I'll go into a little more detail on this later, but I just wanted to show you that this is in this packet too. And then the next page that you want to get to is page 13. And that's your general fund summary. And that's where we'll go through how we ended in the general fund, and I'll go into more detail on that a little later. And then the final 2 things that are there is the one-time cost. And when I talk through the general fund, we'll talk through these one-time costs. But that, I wanted to break those out too so you could see one-time cost and capital outlays. They're not reoccurring expenses. And we specifically wanted to make sure if we went into the deficit and general fund, they weren't for recurring expenses. And then the last bunch of pages are just the detail pages for every one of the funds. So if you're curious about a fund that's increased or decreased, you can go look directly to that. It has the account number, so if you get to the point where you want to ask questions of me, you can refer to the account number and I can research anything that you would like me to. So that's the map for this. I can send this to you electronically also. I have it in a PDF, so any that would like me to do that, I'll be happy to do that. So if we start with the fund summary, I already kind of went through it a little bit, so I probably won't go through that again. That's the first group of pages that I showed you. When you look at the fund summary in total, I wanted to show a graph, and the graphs are also for your ability to analyze. When you look at a graph, it shows you trends, and then it gives you areas to dig deeper. The trend here is we have a clean water facility in fiscal year 17. It really points that out really loud and clear. It shows that we were pretty steady and even, had a few dips, and those will be explained more in detail by the funds, but the big one that stands out is the clean water facility. A large use of our resources, a large commitment. The citywide revenue trends, I wanted to also show it to you in another way, to where you group the utility funds, the special revenue and capital funds, internal service funds, and the general fund. I'll go into more detail and graphs on them later. Again, it shows the large one is utilities, and that's due to there's 2 peaks in there. The first small peak is when the rate increases kicked in to get prepared for the clean water facility, and the second trend is when we started receiving SRF loans and bonds to pay for it. And then the expenditure trend shows that we really started spending heavily going into from 14 to 15, and then we're projecting to spend our top out at $70 million in fiscal year 17. Then we go back down to $11 million for the clean water facility. I also I'm showing it to you in multiple ways because that's how I process. Hopefully it's not too much information. This one is the citywide budget, so I broke it out just to show you percentage-wise. Utility funds make up 77% of our 17 budget, and the rest of the funds are, like, general fund is 13%, internal service fund is 3%, and special revenue funds are about 5%. When the spending on the wastewater, this clean water facility goes down, you see that the percentages adjust. So 52% of our budget will be going towards, expenditure budget will be going towards the clean water facility and utilities, and the rest of the budget is 25% for general fund, 10% for internal service funds, and then the special revenue funds are at 15%. Citywide categories. So one of the pages in here, when we looked at page fund expense breakdown, pages 6 and 7, that just demonstrates in chart form what is in that detailed report. That capital outlay in 17 makes up 68% of our budget, and in 18 it makes up 36%. The other two categories increase percentage-wise in 18 as the capital outlay goes down. So it isn't that the spending goes up that much, it's just that they take up more of a percentage of the total spending. Any questions on that before we head into the capital outlay?
Thank you.
Councilor Servades.
Back up one slide if you would, please, Ms. Sol. Is the 2018 percentages, is that more in line with what we would traditionally see? There's probably some residual
Still
clean
a
water?
little high. We still have
Okay.
11 million of capital outlay going out in 18 for the clean water facility.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Almberg.
Thank you. On page 8, under your citywide fund categories, expenditure trends, you have for 2016, 17, and 18, you have a B, capital B
Oh,
at the end
sorry.
of that. What's that for?
That's my old life coming forward. We always put a B if it was budget, so 16, 17, and 18 aren't actuals. So to
Okay.
differentiate, and you'll see I do that sporadically. I wasn't real consistent.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Council, any other questions? I have a question. On your general fund expense, from what I see on your 75% of 2016, we're at about 10,500,000. If you do that math forward, you would think that we would be at 2016 about 13,150,000. But I think you're telling us that's going to be higher. Obviously, I think we're trying to tell council that's going to be higher because we're projecting an expense number for 2017 of 15 million.
Right.
I'm looking at
Page
page 2 of 92. Yeah. I think what I've heard is that we feel like we have some one-time items that we need to catch up on, that we weren't able to purchase, and that's what I'm being told. And that is the case?
Yes, and
Okay.
I'll go into more detail when I get to the general fund, and I'll actually detail those out for
Okay,
you.
great. Perfect. Thanks.
Yep.
Any other council? Okay.
Okay, so if you go to your packet of information, page 8 of 92, that's the capital outlay overview. So the way I broke this out, it's kind of my logic, so hopefully it matches yours. I listed the department or fund on the very left-hand side, and then a description of the capital outlay request, what year the capital outlay request would occur in, out of the fund. So whatever is coming out of the fund is in these first two columns. Then you go over the code. It'll actually describe any of the other funds that are being used. So I've listed those, and I'll show you where the map is for that. The other funds, 2017, shows other funding for the capital outlay for, let's say, if you go down to parks, and we go down to the Tie House Park playground equipment, and I spelled that wrong, you will see nothing in general fund spending because we are going to be using park impact fees of $37,500. And if you want to go to page 12 of 92 and look at 2C, it will list what those funds are. So we're using neighborhood park impact fees and park impact fees to purchase anything that's noted with a 2C. So it's not coming out of general fund, and it's coming out of funds that if we don't use it, we lose it, and it can be used for playground equipment. So that was the thought process. So as you go through the capital outlay, that shows you that. The total budgeted capital outlay is a combination.
Patricia,
Sorry.
hold up for just a moment here. Councilman Campbell's got a question.
Yes, sir.
The impact fees. Are there impact fees still somewhere in the system for Kimball Park?
Yes.
Or are those impact fees coming from somewhere else?
Kimball Park is one of the capital outlays.
I saw that.
Okay, and yes, it's coming from, we have, Fund 125 and 126 are our park impact fees that were broken between community parks and neighborhood parks.
Mhm.
Those funds are no longer having revenue added to them, but they still have a fund balance.
I thought we had to spend impact fees within 6 years.
That's why, and then that's what we're
And-
doing that for here.
But this particular park has been around for 25 years.
The fees are charged on new things, but we can spend them on whatever kind of parks that we decide, no matter the age of the park, right? Yeah.
Okay, I'll come in and see you.
Okay. So, and then the final two columns, one says total budgeted capital outlay. That's the combination of 17 and 18's capital outlay.
What page are you on?
On the page 8. So the total budgeted capital outlay for general fund is $1,405,919, but that's for a 2-year period. And there's $1.5 million sitting over there in grant projects. These projects are ones we want to do, but we aren't going to budget the money into the general fund expense and revenue until the grant is received. So it would come back to you as a budget amendment. But I didn't want to lose it because it's one of them that we could use the money for. So that's how those are structured. I won't bore you with the detail, but I will provide you with the detail. So I wanted to give you an overview of the capital outlay, how we got where we were. We started out with 79 million in request in 17 and 26 million in request in 18. We cut 817,000 in 17 and 2,968,000 in 18, leaving us the 78,464 and the 23,131. If you note, I don't know how to run the little button, the Clean Water Facility, if you take that out, it doesn't kind of choke you as bad because that's 70 million and 11 million up there. So. But that shows you the work that we did and cuts that were made. Any questions before I move on to general fund? Okay. So general fund, I started with this graph just to kind of demonstrate a trend. So from 2005 through 2018, the first blue-colored portion of the graph is revenue, and the red is expenditures. And so I looked at the ups and downs, any of the extreme ones, and I tried to describe them. So the first one we come to is in 2011, where we dropped down. That's due to a couple of things. It's due to the GASB reclassification of accrued leave. We had it in the general fund, and it got moved out into a fund that was just for that accrual. So the expense was reduced by almost $422,000. And then the bond for the fire was paid off in 2010, so that reduction occurred. And then there were recession reductions, people that we didn't replace because that's when we were headed into the recession. So it dropped expenditures down significantly. You see those two spikes there at the top between 11 and 13. That's when we started significantly funding the stability fund. So it went from and I combined 001 and 002 into this revenue and expense so you could see the correlation. The revenue to the stability fund was 1.7 million that was added, and it was also an expense. So it expensed in the general fund, and it was added as revenue to the 002. So that's why both spikes are the same. If you go over to 2015, we had an increase in revenue. That was timber sales of 310,000, and then the indirect cost increase was just a sec. That was due to Pioneer Way project and the beginning, not the Pioneer, I'm sorry, the beginning of the wastewater treatment plant. Things started happening in the design and the site prep, so the expenses started going up. Our revenue, because that was going on, the indirect cost allocation out of the general fund for our planning people and some of our other staff increased, so that resulted in incoming interfund transfers into our revenue. The stability fund was also funded. That's also part of that increase. We moved another $331,000 over in fiscal year 13 to the stability fund. And in the expenses, public safety had labor negotiations, which resulted in a significant change of about $400,000 to their budget. Then when you get into the last couple years, 17 and 18, we have the clean water facility, bond proceeds, not clean water facility. We have the bond proceeds for Marisco, and we also have the increased sales tax for the clean water, because of the clean water facility. And then the expense at the top, the last one at the very top right, the Windjammer project, we are transferring $630,000 out this year and another $177,000 out of general fund to move the sales tax excess collected into the Windjammer Park. And then the general fund projects are about $153,000. So that's kind of the trend.
Councilor Servatius.
Thank you. Looking at that graph, there's a space between expense and revenue, which makes the expense look more dramatic. But if you look at down below 15 on, the expenses, I'm sorry, 16 on, we're running in a deficit, are we not?
Yes.
Okay. Where do we get that money?
Hold on. Not that much of a deficit, though. So
No,
it's including, well, yeah, that's probably correct. We'll look at that a little bit later when we see the general fund summary graph.
Okay.
But I think pretty sure that's right, but I'll check that, make sure.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Looking at the bottom of the, and those columns for 2017, 2018, comparing the revenue and expense, seems to be shortfall.
Yes.
2017, it's about 700,000, and 2018 is about 200,000 difference revenue.
When we get to the general fund, we'll look at that because I have that detailed out there.
Okay.
It'll show exactly what the difference is. So we'll go there. So if we go to page 13 of your information. Okay, so if you look at the general fund, it breaks it out in the different categories of revenue, and then every one of the departments. The 2017 budget is revenue budget is 14,636,811, and 18 is 13,916,333. The expenses are 15,049,536 and 14,149,777. The difference in 17 is 412,000, and in 18 it's 233 deficit. If we take it a step further, though, if we look at the very bottom where it says operating without one-time cost or capital, we actually end the year before the one-time cost or the capital at a positive 541,839 and a negative 35,811. We are conservatively budgeting our property tax. We're only adding 1%. That is probably not going to be exactly what it is, but you really can't add more than 1% to the budget. There's going to be new construction. There'll be other things that potentially could adjust that. We're also being really conservative with sales tax. So the $35,000 to me probably won't be where we end, but I wanted to demonstrate based on our projections where we ended. If you look up here under the one-time cost and the capital outlay.
Patricia,
yes.
could you back up for just a moment?
Sure.
You lost me on that last
Okay.
one, I'm sorry. So I think Mayor Pro Tem was concerned about our deficit that this budget shows, the deficit of $412,000. in 2017 and the deficit of 233,000 in 2018.
Right.
And I think that's where we need, even I need more explanation of what we're doing here.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, we're spending our beginning fund balance.
Yes.
Yeah, and I either that or we're going back to the drawing board, and I think
Right.
that's the decision this council needs to talk more about.
Right.
Now, where were you going after I
Okay.
just said that?
So where I was going is if you go down to where it says one-time cost and capital outlay, we looked at.
Wait a minute. Okay, we're back to 13. Okay.
We looked at recurring costs. Doug and I, when we were looking at cuts, we tried to make sure that the recurring costs were cut down to where if we didn't do capital outlay or one-time costs, that we would be in the positive. And we succeeded, if you look at the very bottom. But if you add in the one-time costs and the capital outlay, it does put us in a deficit position. But the hope is that it would be a deficit position to accomplish the capital outlay costs and the one-time costs that are detailed out on another page. It is a council decision, you're correct. So this is what we felt was a fair way to budget without cutting even deeper. Because if we have to cut deeper, 412,000, I don't know how you do that without looking at services or people or other things. So I don't know how we would do that, but we just cut out all of our capital outlay and our one-time costs, which that is doable. We could do that.
Councilor Servatius?
Thank you. I appreciate this. This is a lot of information to communicate in a short period of time. Could we back up? I think it's one slide. So tell me if I'm reading this correctly. If I look at 2017 budgeted expenses, up there you have, I'm going to round 15,400,000.
Yeah, and that, I don't know, I think
So
that could be an error.
Okay, the next question would be then if I come to page 13 of 92, trying to get my head around how we are balancing this. 2017 budgeted, we come down to just over 15 million. That does not include the one-time costs or capital outlays,
That
correct?
includes everything. That includes the capital outlay and the one-time costs, yes.
So in theory, those numbers should be the same.
In theory, they should, and what the difference is, I'm looking, and it's, there's a 3 there in front of the 396 should be 049 under the 17 expenditures.
So it's more than a couple digits though, so it's not just a single.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, sorry, the same would apply, I guess, 2018.
And those numbers match.
Those match, okay.
Yes.
And so coming back to the comment the mayor just made, as we digest this, the way to reconcile this is the one-time costs and capital outlays are being covered with a beginning fund balance.
Yes, a portion of them are.
Okay.
There's 954 in one-time cost and capital outlay. Without those, we're at 541 to the positive, so there is room in there for some. Now, the big issue is, of that 541, that is for the Windjammer Park. The 630,000 transfer for the Windjammer Park is included in that 412 negative. That 783,086 capital outlay, that is for the transfer of the excess sales tax. And the 177 and 18 is for the excess sales tax transfer to the Windjammer Park also. So those, if our goal is to make the Windjammer Park happen, those would need to occur. The one-time cost would bring our deficit in 18 down to by 20,000, so still at a negative 200,000. And the one-time costs in 17, if we took those out and everything but the capital outlay, we're still in the deficit also. If we plan to completely move the money, excess sales tax over to the Windjammer Park, because that is a large part of what that capital outlay transfer is.
I can see a lot of wheels turning. Any other questions at this point? Not at this point, okay.
So if you go to the very next page, which is page 14 of 92, you'll see the one-time costs. Those are detailed out, so everything that we are requesting out of general fund is listed in the first two columns. General fund capital outlay is listed, and then any other funds that are being utilized to pay for the capital outlay. But the total is $1,152,197. That would be coming out of general fund over 2 years. But this breaks it down in detail.
That would be coming out of the beginning fund balance.
Not the full $1,152,000, but that's part of what's bringing up the deficit,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So this anticipates, these 2 years coming anticipates catching up on some things that we've put off, actually. So, yes, Mr. Merriman.
Maybe one concept I can throw in to help visualize a little bit. During the recession, there were a lot of things that we held off on until we knew how our revenues were looking. So at that time, there were a number of projects and things that we held off. We saved up that money, thinking that if the recession kept going, we might need that for our core operating. So think of it as if you're at home and you're saving up money to buy a car, for a few years you're going to have more revenue than your expenses, but at some point you're going to take that money out of savings and go buy that car. And that's kind of what this is a little bit. We have money we had set aside for these different things, and now we're taking some of that out. It's not core savings or things that we want to save on a long-term basis, but it's things that we had deferred, held that money, and now we're catching up and starting to take care of some of those things that we had put off for a few years.
So do we have a number anywhere for the beginning fund balances
Yes, actually,
in the previous years?
This slide, oh yeah, I actually have a slide that'll show that too.
Okay, great.
This slide here breaks out what we were just talking about, the revenue less the one-time expense, the revenue less the recurring expenses put us at 541 positive and negative 35 in 18. Then you add in the one-time and the capital outlays. That brings our expenditures up to the 15,049 and the 14,149. And so this deficit is 412,233. If you go down a little further, you see the beginning fund balance, the deficit in 17 and 18, what that ends, the ending fund balance and general fund. And then if you add in the stability fund, which was transfers from the general fund for whatever council chooses to use it for, it actually leaves the ending fund balance for the fund at $4,176,273. And I'll demonstrate that in, I think, hopefully the next slide. Yes. So if you look at the beginning fund balance over since 2006 to 2016, there's been peaks and valleys. We were down with both 001 and 002, which is stability fund and general fund combined. We had $2,416,000 in 2006. We went up to $5,200,000 in between 2008 and 9. The recession came. It looks like things went down. Then it started going back up when things started getting better, 14 and 15. So we ended now at $4,209,000. So it shows the fact that it isn't a steady line and it's not continually growing. It's going up and down as need arises.
So help me one more time. What is the green line and what is the red line?
The green line is the marathon fund because it is part of the general fund. So I included it in the total. It doesn't make much difference. The balance right now in 18 is 12,000. They didn't have any balance from 2006 to 2009. And so it had a spike in 11 and 12. I don't know the history on that very much. And then it started going back down. 2015 it was actually in the hole, and it's currently budgeted to go a little further in the hole. So that's what that one is. The 002 is the red, so that's the stability fund. And then the 001 is the current expense. So that's the general fund. That's the beginning fund balance. That's the $1,000,004 right now.
So this budget so far doesn't anticipate doing anything with the stability fund?
Not that, no, and it would take council action to utilize the stability fund.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Question.
Councilor Omber? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Remind me again what the formula is for that stabilization fund. It's related to the general fund. I thought it was $3 million or 25% of the general fund, whichever is greater.
Right. And it looks back. It does a look back and.
You look back
Yes.
the previous year, so
Yes.
you're comparing it to 2015 or
Yes.
16?
15. And that brings up a good point. When we go to calculate that at the end of 16, when my concern is the 16 revenue is not a stable revenue. It's actually a huge increase because of the sales tax from the clean water facility. So I would like to talk to council or bring forward a resolution to look at, can we exclude the one-time revenues when we calculate that stability fund? Because if we're going to transfer out the excess revenue to a project, but then we also transfer it out to the stability fund, we're going to be looking even worse than what you guys are currently seeing. So that's kind of something I would like to talk through when we come back with the final budget. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's to me, certainly. Okay, anyone else at this point? Yes, Council.
Follow up on that.
Councilor Almond.
But when you have those one-time peaks, which we're having now, you can also have one-time dips.
Yes.
So it really isn't the idea that things over the long term is fairly level, increasing as our expenses and revenues increase at the same increasing rate?
Well, I would think you'd want to look at your trend of revenue, your revenues that are a consistent source of revenue, not a spike.
That are sustainable.
Yeah,
okay,
sustainable
okay.
revenue. If you look at the revenue and you move everything out to the stability fund, then you're eating up even more of your beginning fund balance and general fund. Well, you're not really accomplishing the goal because eventually you're going to have to go after the stability fund if you do that.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay.
So the rest of these are just graphs to kind of break down the different areas. So they're helpful when you're reviewing the information, and then hopefully will generate questions if you have any. The general fund.
Councilor Munns?
Sorry, just back up a minute. When you were talking about possibly coming across with a resolution to exclude, since we're in the middle of this big peak of sales, we would need to do this before the end of the year.
Yes.
In order to have these numbers be more stabilized or real instead of the peaks and valley kind of thing.
So what we would do is when we do the look back, which we usually do after we've closed the whole year, so we've done all of our closing entries,
Right.
we'll look back at 16, and I would like to, if we have planned to move the funding out to support another project out of general fund, I would like the wording, and Doug and I will work on this, the wording to exclude those one-time revenues that we've already targeted for another fund. So that's my concern. If it was revenue that came in and stayed and we used it for the general fund, that's a different matter. But if the whole goal is to target that revenue to move it out to support a project, and you're also then going to adjust your stability fund, that creates a smaller fund balance than what really can be sustainable.
So does this need to be done before 2017, or we can wait till the numbers come in for 2016, which is like a 2 or 3 month delay before we get the actual numbers? It would seem to me, if we're approving a biannual budget, that you would actually need to do that resolution before we approve the final budget, because it makes a difference on how we look. I'm trying to understand this, that
Yeah.
we don't
I think
want
it's,
to go in the hole, and if we need this resolution so that we're not moving money that isn't really going to be there, do we need to do it before the end of the year at one of our December meetings, or can it wait till we get the final? I'm just throwing it out. I don't need an answer tonight. That's what's occurring to me. Maybe this is a sooner than a later thing, that it needs to be done before the end of the year than after. So I don't need the answer tonight. I'm just throwing it out because I think we're all worried about having a sustainable budget. And we don't want to think there's this nugget of false money in there that really, it's out the door before we actually get it. Does that?
Well, what happens with the transfer, you do it after you've received the revenue. So we wouldn't be transferring anything out before we actually had received the revenue. So that wouldn't be an issue. We wouldn't be moving it out before we knew what our revenue was. It's more of a looking forward. So if you're moving out money twice, you're moving it out to support a project, and then you're moving it into the stability fund, you're double hitting your fund balance. And that's all I'm saying. I don't think we would end up in the negative. I think we would be fine, but it would just compress the amount of fund balance available when we head into the next budget season without council action. It'd be sitting in the stability fund, and council could choose to do that and take action at a later date. But I was wanting to just get it cleaned up so we wouldn't be having these huge spikes of fund balance transfers that would then make our ending fund balance look worse in the general fund.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, Councilor Umberg.
Thank you, Mayor. You're balancing 2017 or backfilling the deficit on 2017 with the ending fund balance.
Yes.
That's what I see the numbers. That's what's happening?
We're taking the beginning fund balance, what we anticipate going into 17.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. And then next year, we will do a interim, our
Yes.
adjustment where you get current numbers, current tax revenues, et cetera, and then you do the amendment to the 2017-18 budget.
Beginning
next
and
year.
ending, yeah.
The beginning and ending that way. So
Yeah.
right now, we really don't even have to look at the stabilization fund to balance this out.
No.
The way you have presented it.
No, and that isn't what I was intending.
Okay.
I was just saying that if we are looking at using one-time monies to support projects,
Mm-hmm.
and we currently, the language in our policy doesn't take that into effect. So I was just wanting to clean that up. But
Okay.
if that's not a position, but that's just kind of what I was thinking. So.
Okay.
Okay.
We're okay.
So the general fund revenues, it just shows that the majority of revenue comes from property tax, sales tax, and utility tax. Those are the bottom three tiers. The other revenues that I broke out were license and permits, intergovernmental, the indirect cost allocation, charges for services, fines, and penalties. It also, I wanted to show the percent for your review, just so you can see, property tax, of course, and sales tax and utility tax make up 75% of the 17 budget, and they make up a little over 75% of the 18 budget. The general fund expenditure trend, I grouped some of the things together: police and animal control, fire and EMS, general government, just to show the different areas. With general government, that's where all of our transfers out go. So that also includes the mayor, the administrator, city council, and that grouping. It's just so that I could kind of group like things with like. Parks has the peaks and valleys due to their projects that they would schedule. If you look at the general fund budget by department, it shows which departments are the largest resource users. Fire is 15, police is 30, general government's 9, and parks is about 11% in 17. In 18, police goes up to 39%, fire is still at 15. Parks goes down a little bit to 9%. The projects that they had planned are gone at that point. And then I broke it out in one of your pages that I showed you. There's a breakout between personnel, operating, and capital outlay. So I just broke that out between 17 and 18 just so you could see. The internal service funds I broke out to show those also. You have equipment repair and maintenance, the services that are billed to departments. You have equipment replacement, which is the vehicles interfund transferred over the life of the vehicle. You have shop, which includes public works and engineering. They're also governmental as well as internal service. They do interfund transfers between the departments because they do things for other departments and in conjunction with other departments. This shows that the largest stream, of course, would be the shop. That's where the most of the personnel resides. Vehicle replacement's the next largest because we're putting aside money to replace vehicles. Repairs stays pretty steady. The operating, of course, and these funds are larger because that's where all of our operating and capital is, where our vehicles are purchased from, and a lot of the large operating costs go. Special revenues and capital funds. My trend took out senior center and marina. This includes the REIT funding, arts funding, all of the other funds that are broken apart in our budget. There was a spike in 2011. That was due to the REIT 1 funding for the Pioneer project. And then there was another spike. There's another spike, as you see, for the Windjammer Park, and the transfers out to support the other capital projects, because that's where the park impact fees are and some of the other fees. The marina, it shows a spike. That was because of the Go Bond revenue, Geo Bond, and it was for the dredging project that happened. You see the expenses went up, not as significant, but they went over time, so it didn't happen in 1 year. The senior center, this just demonstrates that their expenses match the revenues because we do subsidize that department. And then the utility funds are my last grouping. Water department was up 3.6 million. Again, it was for they have a cumulative reserve. So that was, I've combined the cumulative reserve and the operating. So it shows both the revenue and expense, the expense coming out of the cumulative reserve and the revenue going into operating. And that was for a water reservoir. So that helps support the water reservoir. In 17 and 18, there's a large amount of projects that are happening in the water fund. When you look at the fund summary, it'll show what the beginning fund balance and ending fund balance are. They're doing the same thing we're trying to do in general fund, catch up on some stuff. The breakout in the water budget for 17 and 18, operating again makes up a big part. Capital outlay makes up the next largest part. Wastewater, you had the start of the rate increase in the revenue, the blue section, and then the upward trend in the expenditures was due to the project site and other costs, and then the budgeted expenditures to do the large part of it in 17. The wastewater is all capital outlay in 17 pretty much, and then in 18 it goes down to about 35 or 75%. It will look different in 19 and 20 once the wastewater project's done. I excluded it to try to see, they are doing some capital outlay in wastewater also, so it still stayed a little higher in capital, but it did show operating makes up the majority of that fund.
Patricia?
Uh-huh.
Question, can we jump back a couple slides to the wastewater fund? Page 22
That one?
of what we're looking at.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just curious because we talk about our rates and we passed, there was the ordinance, I believe it was in 2010 for the rate study. Is that when that was done, or was it? And yet when I look at the revenues, you know, they're fairly flat. They bump up in 2009. Why would they? Is that just more rate payers where they jump up through there and then they drop in 2011? What is that anomaly between 2010 2011? I know you weren't here, so I don't know, Dr. Merriman, if you want to take it on.
Yeah, I think we would have to go back and look at that and just see what makes that dip in the revenue side there.
I'd be curious. We would think the number of utility customers would be fairly consistent and the rate was fairly consistent, but that 11, 12 drop right there and then it gets back to where it was. So, or I guess, you know, that was before your time. I'd just be curious after the fact.
Okay.
If you could. Thank you.
Yep. So wastewater. Okay. And then the solid waste, if you look at that graph, it shows pretty level funding for revenues. There's a couple of spikes in expenses. One of them was a prior period adjustment in fiscal year 15 due to the GASB 68. We had to restate revenues to the tune of about $422,000. One of the requirements of the it's a accrual issue. And then in 17 and 18, there's some vehicle replacement, and the municipal taxes actually came in higher than they were budgeted in 16, so that's why it looks like a larger increase than it really is. The actual cost will come in at a higher, more level rate. And then if you look at the breakdown between operating personnel, they have no capital outlay request. So it's 75% and a small bite for personnel. Storm drains, our last one. It's operating in cumulative reserve. It shows a spike in 2013-14. There was a rate increase. We do have a rate study projected for the storm drain, water, and solid waste for fiscal year 17. The otherwise, it stayed pretty level. And then again, operating makes up the most of these expenses. We do have an added position. So you see that personnel goes up a little bit from 27 to 38. I think the 38's a little high because capital outlay went down significantly, so. And that's it. Any other questions?
Yes, Councilor Heisen.
This is kind of random, but going back to page 6 of 92, where you have employees and expenditures, I just caught under fire you have 20 full-time employees. Don't we have more like 10 or 11?
Well, I did it as full-time equivalent. So I took the number of hours that they are budgeted to have, and I equated to about 10 bodies when you calculate the number of hours. And that's an approximation. That's not an actual.
So like you took all the paid on-call and...
Yeah. And just
turned
did
them
a
into
2080 into
FTE.
how many hours that was.
I thought maybe that was it. Thanks.
Yeah, and it was just an approximation. So you could have a comparability when you look at payroll to make sure that it's because of more people.
Anyone else? Questions? A lot of numbers, a lot of...
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Mayor,
Yes,
if we're done, can we take a brief recess?
take a 5-minute recess.
That'd be great.
Okay? Is that all right? This is your 1-minute warning. This time, we've been on a recess for 5 minutes. Whoops, we'll just, don't rush, don't rush. Before we move on to our next item, we need to actually open the last item up, 6B, our 2017-2018 preliminary biennial budget. Open it to the public. And look for questions from the public. Anybody here like to speak to that? Going once? Twice? Okay, we're moving on to item number 6C. Do you have that too, Patricia?
Yes.
That's ordinance number 1777, property tax levy.
Yes. The slide will cover both the substantiation and the property tax levy, so I'll go through the slides for both of them. Initiative 747, RWC 8455, set a maximum 1% limit allowed to levy on property tax. It also set if the IPD is greater than 1%, then 1% limit applies once an ordinance is passed by council. The county must receive the approved ordinance by November 30th. If an IPD is less than 1%, 2 steps must happen to receive the 1%. The ordinance must be passed by council asking for 1%, and a second ordinance of substantial need must be passed by council. The IPD is a measure tied to inflation, implicit price deflator. It's an index for personal consumption expenditures, and it's used to measure inflation. The IPD rate for 2015 through 2016 came in at 0.953%. This is a historical view of all the implicit price deflators from 1998 to 2016. 4 times in 19 years, it's been less than 1%. The last 2 years, it has been. The process necessary if the IPD is below 1%, if the council chooses to levy the maximum 1% levy, an ordinance required to increase property tax by 1% must be passed, and second, an ordinance showing a finding of substantial need. Both ordinances must be passed by City Council for a 1% levy to be approved and certified. One of them, the 1%, requires a majority vote, and the substantial need requires a majority vote plus 1. Levy scenarios with the increase defined. If we make no change, there's no increase. If we levy the IPD at 0.953, it's a $39,487 increase based on just the 1%. If we levy 1%, which is the maximum, it's $41,807. We can also levy the 1%, but bank the 0.4047% for future needs. That would be increased to our budget of $39,437, and then the $2,370 would be banked. This calculation is done without consideration for any new construction, improvements, changes to state assessed premiums, new turbines, solar, biomass, or geothermal facilities. This is a historical look at the inflation of the CPI, the IPD, and our limit of 1%. We went back to 2001 forward. If we had been able to levy the Seattle CPI, we'd be 42.20% cumulative. If we could have levied the IPD, we'd be at 32.75%, and we're only at 18.42 because we can only levy the 1%. It's a 23.78% difference between the CPI-U and our 1% rate ceiling. Why the 1% property tax levy is needed? To keep pace with long-term impact of inflation, to maintain the existing level of services provided by the city to its citizens, to assist in that endeavor. And the budget currently includes a 1% tax levy. Substantial need, we defined it in 3 ways. We have been increasing our subsidy to the senior center as the county contributions have decreased. The increase in the subsidy for 17 is $34,935, and 2018 it's $24,558. We also have judicial court increase because of the Mount Vernon case versus ACLU. It increased actually both 17 and 18 by $140,000 compared to 15 actuals. And then the PERS and the LEF increases that are mandated by the state, they are creating about an $80,000 increase for our match. This is a history of the property tax revenues from 2011 forward, just so you can see the trend. This shows the certified levy history, each year's levy. The assessed property value, this chart was interesting to me. We had a spike in assessed value, large spike, but when you look at the spike to our property certified levy, it was a very small spike. due to the 1% limitation. It just shows the impact. Normally, a spike to assessed value would allow more, but the 1% limits us. I also did this just to show, because I'm a nerd, the assessed property value, as it goes up, our certified percent goes down because you have more dollars to look at. So it just kind of shows that if we have any risk of getting close to the maximum levy percent, any spike in assessed value helps that not happen as quickly. So property tax, COLA is limited by the IPD. The long-term investment ensures sustainability of the 2017 budget, contributes towards sustainability plans for the future. If we don't increase the levy, we'd be required to make additional cuts in the amount of $41,800, and these cuts would go forward impacting recurring expenses because once you don't take it, you don't get it. So, any questions or discussion?
Okay, council? Yes, Councilor Campbell.
Go back to that 41,000.
Okay. This one or way back?
That's, now that one, what did you say about that one?
The public?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. We should open it to the public
Yeah.
first. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Half asleep tonight, I'm sorry. We'll, before we take it to the council, we'll see if the public's got any input. Well, I knew they wouldn't. But yeah, one more chance. Going once, twice? No, I'm kidding. Okay. Sorry. Patricia, take it away. Well, no, we'll go to council. We'll go to Mr. Campbell.
Thank you. The last sentence up there. If we don't increase the levy, that means keep it 0, don't do 1% or 0.9, then it's 41,000.
41,800 in cuts.
That's with
because
no-
we budgeted in the 40.
Yeah, but that doesn't, if we go the 0.9, whatever it was, it would be a lot less than that.
Yes, 2003. Yeah.
Thank you.
300.
I must have been asleep when you explained that.
I should have put that line in there. Good catch.
Councilor Allenberg?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to support the item number 3, the increase the regular property levy tax by 1% by supporting Ordinance 1777 and 1785. Thank you.
Councilor Servadius?
Thank you. Kind of semantics, but why wouldn't we establish the need first and then pass the ordinance? If we pass the need, I'm just curious, it seems a little, we're passing an ordinance possibly and then backing it up with the need?
Yeah, it seems odd to me too. And the other part is they want us to have a budget including it before we ever come to you with the ordinance too, which is
Okay. Can you back up probably 5 or 6 slides where you show the Seattle CPI? You know, this is one of those items that, because I work with compound interest for a living, if you look at interest on interest on interest over time, you say it lightly that if we don't collect it now, we never get it back. And that's unfortunate because of all the slides, this is probably one of the most telling as to the loss of that, I would call it purchasing power in my world, but here our ability to provide services over time versus what inflation is and what things cost. So while everyone likes to pay as little as possible, I don't want to live in a bankrupt city in 20 years. And you look at this slide in a mere 15 years, what's happened as far as our ability to collect revenue and then provide the services that people expect. I will absolutely support it so that we can continue to provide those services. But I think this is a very powerful and telling slide. Thank you.
Any other council input? What would you like to do? Councilor Servadius?
Thank you. I move to adopt ordinance number 1777.
Have a motion second, Servadius and Munns, to adopt ordinance number 1777. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that one opposed.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Allenberg?
I would like to make a motion to approve ordinance number 1785.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion to approve ordinance number 1785. That's Allenberg and Servadius. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so we've got one
Opposed? Good. Okay.
Point of
We
order,
are-
Mayor.
Yes.
I guess since that's under the public hearing column as well, do we need to open that to the public?
Yeah, that's a good question. We didn't do a public hearing on the 1785. We had a motion already and approved it?
You know, it might be just an idea to go ahead and open one,
Okay.
just to have it as a safeguard if.
I'm going
if
to
that's
back
a
up to
requirement.
6D, even though we've got a motion approved. We're going to back up and see if the public would like to weigh in about ordinance number 1785 for substantial need. Going once? Twice? Okay, seeing no public input, we'll take the motion as presented, or as passed. Moving to item number 6E, ordinance number 1784, low-impact development. And we have our Development Services Director, Mr. Powers.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just a couple of preliminary notes. As you can see, I have some support here. We have Brad Gluth, our civil engineer, Kathy Rosen, Public Works Director. Joe Stoll, city engineer, is lurking at the end of the row. So I'm the face on the presentation, but as you know, this has been a team effort to work our way through this particular code update project. Last preliminary comment that I have for you is that the agenda bill and the presentation this evening are very summary and brief by design. We chose to build from where we left you at the workshop that you had with the Planning Commission roughly a month ago. So without further ado, there are just a few things we're going to try to quickly cover for you this evening. One is why is the requirement for low impact development, simple definition and some very basic principles in terms of how we go about implementing it, what our code update process was, a very, very high overview of what the draft code looks like, a reminder for you of our milestones with the Planning Commission and the Council, quickly look at what's in the agenda packet itself, and then a recommendation for you. So we know that there still are questions about why are we doing this particular code amendment project. The straightforward, simple answer is it's a requirement from our NPDES Phase 2 permit. And as we've talked to you on a number of occasions, that permit requires us by December 31st of this year to do really three things. One is to incorporate LID into our municipal code. Two, require that those principles and the best management practices associated with that are the preferred and commonly used approach to site development. And three, we need to adopt the 2012 DOE Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. I want to say right at the outset that staff is very aware of concerns regarding these particular requirements. We've heard you, we've heard the Planning Commission loud and clear. We think that we've done as good a job as possible in drafting a code that meets our permit requirements, maintains as much local flexibility as we can, and then recognizes that we'll probably need to make some adjustments in the future as we go about implementing this code. So what is LID, or low impact development? Simply put, low impact development requires that most stormwater stay on site. As you know today, most of it is piped away from the site, or it's contained somewhere and then piped away from the site. This is a completely different way of handling our stormwater. What are some of the general principles? We're going to work on reducing the amount of impervious or hard surfaces. It looks at vegetation preservation as one means to try to keep that water on site. We're looking at the use of permeable pavements and then bioretention or engineered solutions rather than what has commonly been called the stormwater prisons. What process have we used to complete this code update? Well, first and foremost, we spent a lot of time on the staff side learning more about this and going through various trainings. Brad Gluth has gone to a tremendous number of trainings. Dennis Lefevre from Development Services has gone to a couple. Even I've made it to one or two of these trainings to try to help us learn more about this requirement coming to us from the State Department of Ecology. One of the other major tasks that we did was to review our existing code, and particularly the amendments that we put into place in 2011. One of the things that we feel very fortunate about is we are better positioned than many communities because we were fortunate enough to get what was known at that time as a technical assistance grant to help us a number of years ago review our code for barriers to low impact development. We removed all of those, and we'd already had our code positioned so that low impact development was a choice. In fact, there were a couple of incentives in there. And so when we had the requirement to move from a choice to mandatory, we were fairly well positioned to make that change. We convened a number of internal stakeholder meetings. So that was public works staff, engineering, fire department staff, building staff, planning staff. We had public stakeholder meetings involving interested groups from our community, such as the school district, real estate agent, representative from SICPA, local engineering firm was represented. As you know, we've had briefings with you, we've had briefings with the city council, or with the planning commission rather, and then finally we set about the task of drafting the amendments themselves. What do they cover? Well, as you know from your workshop about a month ago, it's a wide-ranging series of code amendments. It's in the titles which are listed for you on the screen, everything from streets and sidewalks through zoning, through the environment, into the subdivision. At that workshop, we presented you this book of all of those titles and the changed language in there. Also, it's a little bit larger than as you noticed, than the ordinance that was actually part of your packet, because we were over-inclusive in terms of the language on either side of those places where things were being changed. We wanted you and the Planning Commission to see the full scope of what we were dealing with. So the good news is this got smaller for you in terms of your hearing this evening. I mentioned the milestones. Some of the milestones that we've hit with the Planning Commission and with yourselves, starting back on July 7th of 2015, was really our initial kickoff workshop with the council. And then we spent probably the rest of that summer really getting ourselves organized as staff, and then started our process with our policymakers and our advisors at the beginning of this year. And so you can see those dates on the screen. I won't read all of those to you, of course. The significant one most recently was the joint City Council Planning Commission workshop that we had on October 19th. And then we've been working our way towards this hearing with you. Also note for you that at various points along that timeline, we've had short updates for you as part of your regular monthly workshops, or we've raised this topic in concert with some other topic that we were talking about. What was in your agenda packet today is that summary agenda bill. It's what we've referred to. The second thing is what we referred to as the DOE compliance matrix. As you saw, there were 4 or 5 pages where we went through each of the things that they wanted us to consider. We basically filled out a table for Planning Commission, for yourselves, and for our citizens to say, how do we address those things? Do we have them in our existing code right now? If not, do we plan to address them? If we don't, why don't we think we should have to do that? And we've gone through all of the considerations that we've been asked to review. We included for you a revision list that tells you the things that have been changed since the distribution of this book that I referenced earlier. And then finally, we included the draft ordinance for your consideration. What are the next steps in this process? Well, we believe we're in the home stretch. So what we'd like to have is for the council to conduct a public hearing. If you're comfortable, we can suggest that you take action this evening. If not, continue the meeting on to the December 6th. Our absolute last time for council action in order to be compliant with our permit is December 20th. What happens after we get it in place? Our work is not done. We envision spending certainly the first quarter of next year, and probably a little bit more than that, on 3 main things. One is an education and outreach to our customers, the people that are going to be using this code or are affected by this code. Secondly, we need to spend some time developing some implementation materials, because with new things, we've got to figure out how do we convey that concisely to the public. And finally, we're going to have to continue our staff training, because we've learned what we have to put into the code. Now we have to make sure that we understand how to adequately explain it and how to actually go through the rest of our permitting process. So your recommended action this evening is to conduct a public hearing and either 1, adopt ordinance number 1784, or 2, if there are some substantive questions that you still need our help with, We would then suggest that you continue the hearing to December 6th, give us a chance to get back to you with some answers to those questions, and then hopefully wrap things up on that evening. With that, I'd be happy to help with your questions, as would the rest of staff. Thank you.
Let's open it up to the public, see if we've got anybody here to speak to this. Have the public hearing. Anybody here going once? Twice? Okay. Mr. Powers, you can come back,
barn burner, you
and
can tell.
we'll ask the council if they've got some questions at this point. Input? Yes, Councilor Munns.
I don't want to appear to be attacking staff because I think they probably have the same sentiment I do. I think this stinks and it's being shoved down our throats, and they're not taking into consideration where we live, that we're on an island, that our rainfall is different from who made up these rules, our soil is different. So I don't like any of it. And we're already on a limited budget. I see it as an unfunded mandate requiring additional staff time. But some questions. We brought it up in workshop by doing rain gardens to developments, and they pass, it looks good, and all of a sudden they put a fence around it. So what happens to our staff? You know, they have to get permission to go over the fence or through it if they make an appointment with the homeowner and then they don't show up 3 or 4 times. You know, that's staff time and money taken away from our city, but also for them getting their work done. I mean, there's just too many flaws in this. They mentioned, could compost be provided as an incentive for small projects? Well, who's going to monitor that? You know, we've got other, just trying to keep the city running and the streets, and we're getting stuck with this piddly stuff that I see. I mean, I want to protect the environment, but this does not at all, to me, take into where we live and what we have. We're limited in transportation. Yes, we have bus service, but it's not like the big cities where they have a choice. You know, we have people that work off the island, and I just, if we have to accept it, but do we have to enforce it or take our time? I mean, it's just, there's so much. Or can we work, if we pass it, can we work to get off this list? Because we were kind of swept in last minute into being a phase 2 jurisdiction. It also defeats, if we're supposed to be taking on, I guess mine is more of a comment than question, taking on the additional population, yet Coopville and the county doesn't, and yet they keep their same pollutants. You know, they haven't addressed, to me, the rooftops and driveways aren't polluting as much as the fertilizer and the roadway that's got the grime and the oil and stuff that comes from people, you know, off island onto the island. So we're not even addressing that. I mean, to me, it would make more sense trying to put in some type of filter system into our stormwater before it goes off to the bay, or, you know, I just, it is very difficult to swallow this or think that we have to enforce it when we are down staff anyway and it's limited. How do you enforce it?
So, Mayor, we don't normally respond to comments, but maybe that would be helpful for the rest of council if we just quickly address Ms. Munn's comments with your permission. You'll get no argument from staff about many of your points, Councilmember Munns. We've, for quite some time, questioned the practicality of these requirements. Nevertheless, what we think is very important is for us to stay compliant with our permit. Because if we don't, then we run some other risks. And so what we've tried to do, and this is where our outside stakeholder group was invaluable to us, is because we heard from the engineering representative, from the real estate representative, and from the building industry representative, preserve as much flexibility as you possibly could. They understood that in many ways our hands are tied, that there are so much of this is very prescriptive. But where we had an opportunity to maintain some flexibility, they encouraged us to do that, and we believe we've met that request. So I guess that's the first part here, which is to the best of our ability, we've left the design choices in the hands of the designers. So rather than the city, as an extension of the arm of the state, dictate what the solution is, we've left that in the hands of the developer and the consulting engineer. Now, it doesn't mean that they get to choose all of the standards, right? I mean, again, we're working inside of a pretty small box, but inside of that box, we've left as much flexibility as we can. We've freely admitted to the Planning Commission as well as to the council at our workshop that this puts us in an uncomfortable position as well. We are normally accustomed to coming to you and saying to you, we think we've got this code pretty well ironed out and we don't expect to have a lot of problems. That's not the message we're delivering to you here. We've done the best job that we possibly can, but many of the practical things that you've mentioned, and particularly in terms of implementation or enforcement down the road, we have pointed out to the Department of Ecology, or more specifically, Mr. Gluth has pointed out on a number of occasions to the Department of Ecology representatives. So far, those comments are falling on deaf ears. So we fully anticipate that there will be some bumps in the road as we work our way through this process. But this is as good a solution as we can bring forward at this time. And thirdly and finally, I think you suggested that, can we put this in place and then try to work on a longer-term solution that maybe removes us from this requirement. Such a change would obviously take the action of the legislature. I think staff would highly encourage that we consider that as a possibility. Trying to go that route before we adopt it obviously isn't going to work. So probably the best path for us is to put this in place, be permit compliant, and then try to explore what our solutions are at the state level. Thank you for that, Mayor.
Thank you.
Any other council questions? Yes, Mr. Almberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I agree with Councilmember Munns that it is an unfunded mandate. I think I've had lengthy conversations with staff over that, and that unfunded mandate will be experienced by both the city and both the form of maintenance, long-term life of surfaces, pervious surfaces, and equipment, etc. In addition to, as was stated in one of our workshops, that it will possibly increase the cost of a single residential lot by $35,000. And I was kind of surprised when I heard that, and I actually did some numbers on that, both on-site and in the street right-of-way and things like that. And I think those are real numbers, $35,000. Now, the thing that I'm really opposed to in this, and I make no apology for it, is by increasing housing costs, I think flies in the face of compliance with the GMA and our requirements to provide affordable housing. This is not providing low-income housing. This is providing affordable housing for our young teachers, our staff, all of the young people who are here, people who are in that category called mean household income in this community, which is about $42,000, $43,000 per year. You're not going to be living in a $400,000 home making that kind of money, but that's what it's going to lead to in order to implement this, and especially when there are other alternatives to accomplish the same thing. And I'm not going to sit here all night and rant about this. I've already ranted to the staff about it. But I would like to ask you a couple of questions here. When I read the permit was updated in August 1, 2013, and the permit expires July 31, 2018. And my question was, why do we have to do this amendment right now, or adopt the LID thing right now, December 31, 2016? Well, it states that in the permit that we have to do that. Yes. What is the rationale for doing that, where it has to be adopted, and then by that same document, it is enforceable on January 1, 2017? And I'm looking up on the board up here, and you're saying, well, we are going to adopt our ordinance December 6th, December 20th, and or excuse me, January, go back to that number. I think it was December 6th and December 20th, it has to be put in place. So we have to have it adopted. You have to have this work done. We have to have it adopted, presented by the end of the December.
That's correct. Our permit requirement from Department of Ecology requires us to amend our code and do the work that we've talked about by the end of this calendar year.
Okay. So then, what if we don't? What is the consequence? You said we are exposed to other risks. Could you describe what are realistic other risks in this situation if we say we don't want to do this right now?
We're a permit holder, Mr. Almberg, like 83 other Phase 2 jurisdictions in Western Washington. They all have the same requirement, which is to be compliant with the permit. So in that sense, we're not any different than the private party in our community who we issue a permit to. And we say these are the rules that you need to follow in order for you to do this particular project or have this particular sewer connection or water connection. And failure for that party to comply means that they are subject to whatever requirements are within our code that address those penalties. So for our permit, again, we're a permit holder, and so we're subject to whatever the requirements are out of that permit in terms of needing to be following all of these particular guidelines.
But what if this is not in compliance with our GMA requirements? How do we solve that problem when DOE is going down one path and the GMA regulations are going down a different path, and we're caught in the middle and we have to comply with both of them?
It's an excellent question. You might recall that at the workshop, we raised that issue with the council to be sure that you knew that we were aware of that. And sometimes what we talk about is balance, right? So even within our own comprehensive plan, there are competing goals. So we can't possibly say that all the goals within our own comprehensive plan are 100% consistent with each other, because if you're going to go in a particular direction following this idea, it is at times maybe not opposed, but not wholly consistent with this other idea. So here you have a perfect example of different mandates from different state agencies. As we know, the state law for Growth Management Act tells us these are the things that we're supposed to do, of which affordable housing, planning for it, trying to provide for it, is one of the most important things that we're supposed to do. By the same token, we're handed a different set of regulations from a different state agency, which is telling us that we need to follow these particular environmental regulations. All we can do is to try to balance those things to the best of our ability in each and every particular situation. Now, if we raise that issue with ecology, they would say that we can maybe meet our affordable housing needs in multifamily or in an attached townhome, that not everybody needs to be in a detached single-family house. And there's truth to that statement. Our counter to that statement has always been that the GMA tells us we should provide a range of housing for a range of households and a range of individuals, that the housing needs of that young teacher are different than somebody who is at the opposite end of the age spectrum and who already are in an empty nester situation. That's our obligation under the Growth Management Act. Arguably, the Department of Ecology is looking at it only from one particular perspective. It is an inherent conflict in this, and the best that your staff can do is to try to balance that as we move forward with each of our individual projects that come through our door.
I'm more inclined to say staff should be challenging this, and we should be meeting with our legislative body to talk about the differences here. For example, our rainfall, et cetera. We have half the rainfall of other areas, and then also in this permit, they can make exclusions for regions for a variety of reasons. For example, they have excluded Cowlitz County, they have excluded Lewis County, they have excluded Aberdeen-Hoquiam area from complying this through the same timeline. They have it right in the permit. They're excluded. Why are they excluded, and why can't we have an exclusion?
The best of our recollection on the staff level is that was done for some level of economic reason. But it's important to note that they aren't waived from the requirement to meet the permit conditions. They just have a delayed timeline. So they're still subject to the same requirements. They just don't have the same December 31st, 2016 date that we do.
Well, why don't we work on a delayed timeline?
These are all excellent points, Mr. Allenberg, but the reality is, and I know that you're aware of this, that's not possible to do between now and the end of the year.
Okay.
And so, again, at the risk of repeating myself, the best course of action for the city is to put this into place and then take up our issue with our elected
All right,
representatives.
I got 3 more questions because I would like to have the answers come back on the 6th. And what is the engineering data for the determination of the life of permeable concrete asphalt? We haven't been presented with any of that information. That is not as stable as solid concrete, solid asphalt. Okay, that's that one question. Why doesn't the LID design concept allow for low rainfall weather conditions from different areas in western Washington? We're swept with a broad brush. In this area, we have half the rainfall as Olympia, Seattle, inland farther. And the reason that's important is because when you put in the rain garden and you have to do the infiltration trench for your downspouts and all that stuff, or on-site hard surfaces, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, but I believe I read in there it's 190 feet per 1,000 square feet of impervious, which when you take a city lot of, say, 7,200 square feet, and you have 1,500 square feet of impervious, or 2,000 square feet, all of a sudden you've got 300 or 400 feet of trench with impervious in your small lot someplace. That's a requirement. That's a practical thing that I don't know how you really do that and make it really work. That's a quantitative thing.
It is, Mr. Allenberg, and just waiting for your third question, but on terms of that second one, I think you're asking us to defend why ecology chose to sweep us with that broad brush, and I don't believe we're going to be able to provide you that answer by December 6th.
Well, the public deserves an answer to that. They truly do. And I don't know about December 6th, but they do deserve an explanation. The other thing is, one of the keystone elements of our GMP manual, and I think it states it in there pretty clearly, and we used to follow this policy, and I think we still do, is sole source prevention at sole source pollution, point of pollution. But yet, people can still use phosphate fertilizers, they can use chemical herbicides, pesticides, all those type of things, and we're infusing it into the ground, and some of it's even going to go on the surface. Why aren't we not attacking the source of the primary pollution rather than the means to get those pollutants to the groundwater, which is part of state waterway, streams, shorelines, lakes, all that stuff? Those are the areas that the Federal Clean Water Act said they are protecting. But we don't have a prohibition against those contaminants.
My understanding, Mr. Allenberg, is that while those are a contributor to that particular problem, the primary contributor of the problem is the vehicles. So it's oils and gas and brake fluid and brake dust, and the things associated with vehicles are the primary pollutants that are in the stormwater. But we'll endeavor to answer that question for you more fully on December 6th.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Councillor Heisen?
Just a few comments regarding doing research into the estimated useful life of permeable asphalt and things like that. If this is part of a regulation that we are required to adopt, then I'm not really sure why staff researching into the useful life of permeable asphalt is really relevant. Like you said, developers can choose from options and choose the one that's best for them. So that's an estimation that they'll have to make. And I appreciate all of Mr. Allenberg and everybody else's comments, and I think the public does deserve an explanation, but again, that's not staff's responsibility. That's something that needs to come from our elected representatives at the state. So that's our responsibility to hold them accountable and come back with those answers. I don't think it's fair to charge staff with a request to challenge this. That's on us, which we can continue to do. But in the meantime, I would move to adopt ordinance number 1784.
So we have a motion to adopt ordinance number 1784.
Mr.
Second.
Mayor?
I think I heard a second. Did I hear a second? So we have a motion and a second to adopt ordinance number 1784. Discussion? Yes, Mr. Servadius.
You know, I'm very much noting Councilmember Munn's, Councilmember Almberg's concerns. I grew up in a small farming community in southern Idaho, and, you know, the way we dispersed our motor oil was you poured it out on your dirt driveway to keep the dust down. And times have certainly changed. We have, you know, I've got a car sitting in my garage at the moment. The seat belts aren't required in it, and I made this comment in the workshop that, you know, lead paint used to be okay, and while we may not like these mandates, I don't know if delaying it is going to truly change the process. And while we can ask staff to come back with some of these answers, if we wait until the 6th, I don't know that, or the 20th, if we are required to comply with the permit, that would be like telling our citizens, go ahead and blow all of your leaves, your grass clippings into the gutters. We know we have an ordinance against that. But go ahead and do it and then come back and see us and we'll talk about changing it. I think if we really want to change this, it should be one of our legislative priorities that we put together with Dr. Merriman to march further up the food chain. So I very much note the concerns that both of you made. I resist some of these mandates as well, but I don't know that it's going to change our required compliance. If we're serious about it, then we need to get together and work on making that a legislative priority to possibly get off this phase 2 permit.
Other council? Yes, Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support the this motion on the floor. Although it appears that being forced by the Department of Ecology to follow this unfunded mandate. If the city does not follow this mandate, we're taking the risk as mentioned by Mr. Powers, and I think the risk outweigh of not following this mandate.
Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else? Councilor Campbell?
This exercise that we're going through takes me back to the days of when I was working in the nuclear weapons world. There were a lot of rules that came down that we had to comply with that a lot of us didn't agree with. So our attitude had to change a little bit, and this is very classic like that. We've got something we've been told we have to do. We don't have enough time to change it, so we need to comply with it. And then I would suggest that this body in February, when we go down to the AWC meeting, have all of our ammunition in our hands, talk to our legislators, and start the process of getting it changed. So that someday somebody will come back and say, well, you don't have to do that anymore, and we can throw that ordinance away. Thank you.
Anyone else? Just one. Okay, Councilman Almberg.
Okay, couple of comments here and still a question. For Mr. Powers, we keep hearing risk, and I still haven't heard to define what that risk is if we do not have it. I know we will not be in compliance with this permit by this date. What is the consequence? Specifically, what is the consequence? I don't think that question has been answered. Does anybody really know what the consequence is? That's one thing I'd like to know at least today or by December 6th.
There are third parties who are tracking this particular topic across Western Washington.
So be specific, please.
Puget Sound Keepers is a third-party organization which is tracking and inquiring of local jurisdictions as to whether or not you are on timeline in terms of meeting your permit requirements. And Mr. Almberg, if you're asking for specific legal ramifications, I don't think staff will answer that question for you in open session.
And I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for...
With respect, I feel like we're getting dangerously close to that,
okay.
sir. Department of Ecology can impose fines.
But do we know that for a fact?
Yes, we do, sir.
Okay. I will accept that as the answer for right now, but I would like to have, at some point, even if this gets passed tonight, from staff, I would still like to get answers, real answers about those, whether they're legal or technical otherwise. The other thing to respond to Ms. Heisen's comment about why do we need the data for the life of these surfaces, it is important from this standpoint is that impervious surfaces like concrete and asphalt are more fragile than solid concrete and solid asphalt. And there is a short life about how permeable those surfaces are. Asphalt compacts with heat, even permeable does, and the fines get into the permeable concrete. There's also, you have the freezing and heaving conditions of those things. So there is a shorter life cycle of that kind of product, given those properties, which translates to the city will have additional maintenance costs that we need to be looking at downstream. Not necessarily today, probably not even next year, but the following years, we have to be concerned about that. And when we make these decisions, I don't think we're making a decision just for today. We're making a decision in many cases for 5, 10, 20, 40 years down the road. I still would like to have that information.
And I think we'll do our best to provide that to you. And Brad gets a little nervous when I pretend to be an engineer, but my understanding is that data is still evolving. It's not being, there hasn't been enough of this used out there in the real world yet. Some places, yes. Most places, no. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, Mr. Allenberg, is we'll do our best to gather that, but it's possible that the hard data that you're looking for doesn't completely exist yet.
And that bothers me a little bit, that we're being required to do something based on information that is not solid.
And it bothers us too.
Okay.
Kathy and Brad have been, I think, staying up late at nights worrying about what does this mean to our ability to take care of our streets. We fully understand those concerns.
Thank you very much. And I have to compliment you, Mr. Powers. You did a shining job of your presentation on a surface that is almost pervious. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, I think. One suggestion that the staff could make for the council that may help just a little bit here is the actual effective date of the ordinance. Our normal template says that it's effective 5 days after publishing. If the council would feel more comfortable, we could set the effective date of this ordinance as December 31st, 2016. And that way then, while your action would be completed this evening and we'd be compliant with the permit, it would be absolutely clear that it would not take effect until the very first day that we would have to have it take effect under our Department of Ecology permit.
Councilor Wassinger.
Would we need to amend the motions, or?
I think that would be appropriate.
Friendly amendment.
Okay, I will add then an amendment to the motion, if I could.
Okay.
I move to amend the motion to include.
Change the effective date?
Yes, to change the effective date to December 31st, 2016.
Second.
So we've got a motion and a second to change the effective date of the passing the ordinance number 1784 to December 31st, 2016. Any questions? All in
Second.
favor? Oh, we have a motion and a second already, I believe.
Okay, sorry, didn't hear the second.
Yes. Yep, motion by Wassinger, second by Heisen. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so we have 6-1 vote to amend the motion, and the motion is to adopt ordinance number 1784.
No. We've got two votes. One was the friendly amendment to change the compliance date 31st January. The other one was the amendment to.
Well, I thought we just did the amendment. That's what we just did. We just passed the motion and second to amend
Okay.
the ordinance.
Okay.
So the amendment is now going to, it will be effective on December 31st, 2016.
Yes.
but we do still need to pass
Right.
or vote on the motion to adopt ordinance number 1784. Okay? Everybody clear? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, let the record show. We've had 2 split votes tonight, by golly. Okay. We are now moving to item number 7. We have a resolution, 1627, Lodging Tax Advisory Committee awards for the 2% grant applications. And it looks like Dr. Merriman is coming to discuss this.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This agenda bill is our annual process of bringing forward the recommendations from our LTAC as far as funding for our lodging tax our lodging tax grant program for 2017. The process we've had so far is back on September 6th of this year, we did the referral to start that 45-day clock to get things going and referred $250,000 to the LTAC to be considered for this next year's funding. On November 4th, the LTAC met to review the applications. We had done the call for applications and actually received 14 of them, which is probably one of the higher numbers of applications we've received considering past years. Those went to the LTAC, and they did meet to have that unenviable task of trying to thin that down to $250,000. As you can see from the agenda packet, the original list of those 14s were $379,000 plus in application requests for funding compared to the $250,000 that we had available. Through the process that the LTAC uses, and it is up to their discretion how they come up with that listing, they were able to come up with the list that is shown on our resolution. It's resolution 16-27 on how they would recommend that $250,000 be spent. And you can see there are 11 applications that are receiving funding. There were 3 of those that did not receive funding. So the recommendation that we have for you tonight is to adopt Resolution 1627, approving their recommendations to you. And then we'll have a second step that will authorize the city administrator, if we do approve that list, to go ahead and sign the contracts. Now, we have 2 of those contracts that exceed the $30,000 signing authority of the city administrator. So we're looking at the 2 chamber contracts that are on that list. Now, we did have someone mention to us that the draft contracts in your packet erroneously show them as 2-year contracts. They're supposed to be 1 year. There's a 2018 date, should say 2017. So we have those 2 steps to do tonight. If we go ahead and approve those, then we'll be signing those contracts and sending those out with award letters as soon as possible. So I can address any questions you might have.
Okay, I guess we'll reach out to the public, see if anybody here wants to speak to this beforehand. Yes, we've got somebody coming to the podium. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Greg Smith. I'm the current president of the Rotary Club of Oak Harbor. I've never done this before, so hopefully this is what the invitation was for, just to throw a plea out there as far as, and I know there's a very limited amount of funds. There are very qualified and highly necessary events that are going on that will bring more folks to Oak Harbor, and even potentially fill the rooms in the hotels, shops, whatever the folks that come to visit want to do. So for the Hydros for Heroes, the initial request was $30,000. The only reason I'm here to be able to speak to that, if I may very briefly, because I know it's late, is that it was a pretty decent haircut on that, with the fact that a lot of the reduction of that is now going to be put on our Rotary Club's finances to be able to cover that difference. So we put a lot of money forward for our high school scholarships that we had to reduce this year. We had to reduce that because of our limited funds available in our foundation. The backpack food for kids program that we do, we're now charged with about $20,000 a year, and that's going up. So that is going to have an impact on that as well, for us to be able to try and maintain that. Because we are trying to compensate for the what we're lacking now, because Craig McKenzie, the Craig McKenzie team, he cannot personally take on all that risk as a personal liability. So I just wanted to put a request out there that if that could be amended or adjusted to be able to award the Hydros for Heroes a little bit more love. So thank you very much.
Okay. Public comment, still open? Anybody else? Going once, twice? For not having done that before, you did a nice job there, Mr. Smith. And we'll call Dr. Merriman back up and turn it to the City Council. Yes. Councilman Alber.
Thank you, Mayor. On the contract for the chamber, as you pointed out, they are shown as 2-year contracts. Haven't we done 2-year contracts in the past?
We have done those in the past.
What's the rationale for it being 1 year this time?
Just a quick history.
Okay.
In the past, the Chamber's operating contract was handled outside of our grant program. You might remember we used to do, one time it was 80,000, one time we did 1% of the 2%. Would go to the chamber, and those were different contracts for different terms. The last cycle, the application came in as a request for a 2-year contract. So it went through the LTAC as a recommendation to them to consider that. In the minutes from their meeting, they discussed it as a 2-year contract, and it came to council and was approved that way. The applications this time all came in as 1-year contracts, were discussed that way, and came back through.
Thank you for the explanation.
Yes, Councilman.
Could Dr. Merriman answer the question to the Rotarians about the amounts, whether or not they can be raised or lowered? I believe there's a set rule that he may not be aware of.
There is. When the new laws were passed in 2013 on lodging tax, it put more of the control of how the money's spent to the LTAC versus the City Council, like it used to be in the past. In past years, City Council used to be able to change the amounts, or pretty much looked at the LTAC's recommendation as strictly an advisory recommendation. With the law changes in 2013, now the LTAC's recommendation is more binding on the city. And council's only options are you could approve it as shown, you can approve nothing and send it back to the LTAC, or you can remove individual items from the list, but you cannot change the dollar amounts that show on the recommendation list from the LTAC. If council wanted to consider changing amounts, it would mean a second round of making a referral to the LTAC for another decision. It would restart that 45-day clock. And that would be the only way you can suggest to the LTAC that they reconsider their list that they've sent to you.
Thank you.
Councilor Campbell.
I make a motion we approve Ordinance 1627.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve ordinance number 1627. Motion by Mr. Campbell, second by Ms. Heisen. Questions? Yes.
Just a little further discussion. I know Mr. Smith asked that question. I got the question. It actually came up during, well, I also want to thank the committee for making my job as chair somewhat, it was pleasant. It was a very tough experience, but I appreciate their time and their commitment to the process. One of the questions that came up several times is what's the end goal for the cash on hand? And I had a conversation with Dr. Merriman, and I understand at a future workshop he's going to put an agenda item together, because there is a question of, can the council refer some extra dollars out there? And we certainly can. My hope would be that we look and possibly prioritize some projects where we can leverage those dollars, maybe matching a grant or something to get a little more mileage out of that, rather than, there was a concept during the LTAC process of, hey, if we open this up and spend an extra $30,000 or $50,000 to fund all this stuff, can we do that? And we certainly could, but then we would be, expediting our way through that fund fairly quickly in, 5 to 7 years, depending on how much we spend. So I know there's a motion to approve this amount, but that was a question that I got, and I just wanted to touch on that.
Anyone else? Input? Yes, Dr. Merriman.
Thank you. Just if you can indulge me a quick second, I noticed, or Nikki actually caught it, as it was said here, that the motion includes the approval of Ordinance 1627. I just want to make sure that we inscribe that as Resolution 1627.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a motion actually to adopt Resolution 1627. Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Yes, Councilor.
I do have a comment now that we have passed this resolution. I do believe that it is the intention of the Chamber of Commerce to continue with their operations center. I know this was a one-year contract, and I mentioned this back on the September 6th meeting too, about extending that to a multi-year contract. 3 being a possibility. I think that sounds reasonable. So if I could, I'd like to make a motion to refer to the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee for consideration the extension of the 2017 Lodging Tax Award to the Greater Oak Harbor Chamber of Commerce in the amount of $115,000 for operations for a 3-year contract period.
Yeah, I didn't even try and write that down.
I've got it.
Oh, you've got it written down. Good, okay. You want me to read the motion again?
Please.
Please.
Motion to refer to the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee for consideration the extension of the 2017 Lodging Tax Award to the Greater Oak Harbor Chamber of Commerce in the amount of $115,000 for operations for a 3-year contractual period. That's the motion. Councilor Campbell?
Does that mean that
Mayor, point of order, I'll second it so we can have the discussion.
Okay, yeah, okay.
does that mean you're asking, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Is it that if we do that, then what we're doing is awarding the chamber $345 in 1 year, and let them spend it over 3?
No.
And I don't understand your motion.
I'm sorry.
Says, motion to refer to the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee for consideration the extension of the 2017 Lodging Tax Award to the Greater Oak Harbor Chamber of Commerce in the amount of $115,000 for operations for a 3-year contractual period. So I believe it's meant to be $115,000 a year.
Per year.
That's what I just said. For 3 years, that's $345,000.
Over 3 years.
So we still have a motion and a second. Other, yes, sir.
I'm still confused by what this is.
I'll let Councilor Wassner speak to that.
I just meant for it to continue as they just ended a 2-year contract where they were, and I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head what the dollar amount was per each year. I assume it was close.
It's $100,000 per year.
$100,000 per year. They just had a 2-year contract so that every year they weren't throwing that operational center $100,000 ask in with everyone else, so that it was just given to them just the $100,000 per year. That's what we just finished. They had a 2-year contract, so I'd like to continue giving them a multi-year contract. I would like to give them a 3-year contract, $115,000, which we've already awarded for the year 2017. So award $115,000 in 2018 and $115,000 in 2019, having it expire on December 31st of 2019.
Okay. You've explained your motion, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With this new item on the City Council, motion and seconded, will go under our standing rule where it will go to the next meeting or succeeding meetings of the council?
Actually, it's a good question. I think it's a motion that we're considering tonight. I don't think it's...
It's a new item.
So
Right.
he's
What-
wondering if it needs to go.
What we're looking at are two different things. City council, and please correct me if I'm wrong, city council can bring up motions and have those things as they want to during a council meeting. If you want to put something on an agenda, that's where we get a first or a second to place it on a future meeting's agenda. So those are two separate items there. But city council is allowed to go ahead and make motions and do business as it sees during its meeting.
Thank you.
Councillor Heisen?
Just to follow up on that, we're also not, the motion isn't for us to spend money, it's just to refer a suggestion back to the LTAC for consideration. So all we're doing is asking them to consider it. I appreciate the theory behind a contract, especially when it's an operating budget, to not know what's coming. But I am concerned that by referring that for only one of the applicants might open a can of worms, and then everyone will want to know why their contract can't also be extended. So that's my concern about the suggestion, while I do appreciate the spirit of it.
Councillor Munns?
Thank you, Mayor. I too am concerned with open can of worms because we've just changed. Either council accepts it all or we don't, and referring something back, not that I don't believe in it, but was there a reason why these were only referred to the LTAC as a one-year contract? Because last year we had a 2-year contract. So I'm just wondering, leave it as it is, next year's LTAC, and have them consider that operating budget, or it should be written up, that they would like that as a 3-year contract. But right now, I think we're in conflict because for some reason, it was only done, the application, all of them, for 1 year. And so I think I agree with Councilman Heisen that we are going against the rules that were given to us by the state. So next year, when the LTAC meets, be sure that that is specified for operation for chamber, that it is a 2 or 3 year budget that we're looking at for them. So those are just my comments. If there's some clarification on, maybe I'm looking at it wrong.
Councillor Servadius?
Thank you. I think to clarify where Councilmember Wassinger was going, and having listened to these discussions, we've often talked about giving the chamber a consistent source, or at least a multi-year source of operating income. Backing up, Dr. Merriman, you said the contract, I'm not seeing it in here, but you said in here it was written as a 2-year contract? I know it was the previous time.
The previous time it was, but I think the contract that's attached to the agenda bill, we were looking at one just prior to the meeting with Mr. Almberg, and one of them has an expiration date of 2018 on it.
Both of them do.
Both of them do?
Both of them do.
Okay. And that should say 2017.
Okay. So what the council approved in September was an allocation of $250,000 to accomplish whatever applications came in. Those applications came in, we allocated that money. If we so chose, as I said earlier, we could allocate the remainder of the cash on hand, which you all have in front of you. And Ms. Wassinger's motion is implying, let's earmark, for lack of a better word, 2 years in addition to what we're approving, refer that back to the LTAC. Does it go back, Dr. Merriman, to the LTAC to start that 45-day period?
Correct.
They then would have to bring back a recommendation to the council that says, we think it makes sense or we don't think it makes sense to allocate 2018, 2019 dollars for operations to the chamber. I know we currently, the conversation also that's come up is with Island County, we have a contract every year for the joint tourism program that just rolls over. There is no, and maybe that's something the council should look at, but there's no application, there's no reapplication for that money. It just goes out every year to Island County for their joint tourism promotion. So I don't think this is that distant of a request to look at a multi-year contract to give that organization, and I'm on the board of that organization, but to give them that stability and funding.
Yes, Councilor Holmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Heisen and Munns on this from the perspective of fairness. If we send this back, then do we send other people's back? Mr. Smith is here asking to go back. Everybody has taken a hit. We're not asking the chamber to take a hit. We're just talking about a timeline on a contract. Now, with respect to the timeline, we've had 2 years timelines, but we always get a performance presentation from the chamber, and I kind of like that 1-2 year thing to see what the performance is. We don't know what the performance is, we don't have a crystal ball what it is after 2 years. So it doesn't really stall our chamber, in my observation, in terms of money and performance for operation, but it also shows a level of fairness that we treat everybody equally in the process. So I guess you know that I will not vote for sending it back to the LTAC. Thanks.
Yes, Councilor Heisen.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree, and I'm not comfortable referring this back to LTAC for a single applicant. Love the chamber, nothing personal, but I agree with Ms. Munns' suggestion that this be part of next year's. I think it may be in the application process, the applicants could request a multi-year contract or a one-time thing, and then the LTAC committee could, when they're making their decisions about how much money to award, they can also make a decision about whether or not they want that to be a 1 or a 2 or 3 year contract, and give the LTAC committee the option, because they're the ones making these decisions, and I think it's important to leave those decisions in their hands. And so next year, if we want to change the process a little bit, if that's something that we can do, if people can request ongoing funding, then I would really like to see that become part of the process. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, Councilor Campbell.
I'm still a little confused. I like the system the way it is. I'm confused at, there's 2 ways to look at this. If we made what we've got today a 3-year contract, that means the chamber's going to lose a whole bunch of money every year, because it's going to have to be $115,000 cut 3 ways. So they're going to lose a lot of money. Also, if next year the LTAC money is not any place close to $25,000, does that mean that we're going to give $115,000 to the chamber and everyone else is going to be cut have less of an opportunity to get money? I mean, you got $25,000 here. It was $250,000, and it was split in a probably as best could be done. And if we change it, I'm afraid that the chamber's going to get less money, or we're going to have to start eliminating other people to satisfy the chamber money, or it's going to come out of the city purse. And we've already heard tonight what our next budget's going to look like, and that doesn't seem to me that we got enough money to do 3-year contracts. I'm done.
Yes, Dr. Merriman.
There might be a couple of different questions I heard, just to make sure we're on the right track and everybody's understanding what the process one is. I know Ms. Munns mentioned about us maybe potentially bumping into being out of compliance. Being that council already adopted the LTAC's recommendations prior to the second motion coming up, we're not in conflict with anything there, because we're not changing a recommended list. We now have an adopted list by that first action. So that part, we're okay there. That's taken care As far as a 3-year contract, say for the chamber, what that would mean is $115,000 for this year, another $115 for the second year, and then $115 for the third year. So really what the difference is if we stick with the approved resolution at this time, we've obligated $115,000. I think what Mr. Campbell's talking about, if you go to a 3-year contract, you're obligating $345,000. It's just over 3 years. So the chamber won't be at risk at losing money. It would actually give them consistency in that revenue for the next 3 years. As far as the probability of the lodging tax fund, we talk about the budget, we may talk about the general fund, and that things are tight there. The lodging tax fund runs separate from the general fund. It doesn't pay for our operations or, trucks, cars, people. It's restricted by state law just for these types of tourism support events. So the sustainability of it, we budget or at least project conservatively. We're probably a little bit over $200,000 a year that comes in now. It's grown that much. So what we would do in this case, if you did say $115,000 for 3 years, instead of $250,000, you would have to subtract that $115,000 from that. And if we kept at the same funding level, that means the next couple of years it would be $135,000. That might be a little bit confusing, but that's essentially what everyone else is getting right now anyway. So if that's confusing, I'll just forget I ever mentioned that piece of it. But my point is being that we have the funding in the years to do it. The funding is not a question, and it's just merely a sense of extending the contract to 3 years. The money is really not the issue to it. It's just the term of the contract. Hopefully that's helpful.
Call for the question.
Okay, you've heard the motion. We have a motion and a second. Any need to read it?
Please read it.
Again? I'll read it again. Motion to refer to the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee for consideration the extension of the 2017 lodging tax award to the Greater Oak Harbor Chamber of Commerce in the amount of $115,000 for operations for a 3-year contractual period. So we've got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Let me see, we probably need that show of hands again. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor. All those opposed?
Aye.
And we've got 3 opposed. Yeah, these 3 are opposed. These 4 are in favor. Okay. Now that was a split vote. We need to extend our time. Yes, Councilor Surveillance.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to suspend the council's rules and extend our meeting time to 10:30.
Second.
So we got a motion second to extend the rules and expend the rules. I guess
Suspend
it is.
the rules
Yeah,
and
suspend
extend.
the rules and extend the time to 10:30. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And I think we need to take a break again.
It's probably a good idea.
Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
Just point of order, did that motion then suffice the need to amend the contract, or you're just pointing out the contract was written incorrectly?
This is the change of contract.
We can handle the contract side of it. We would probably go ahead and write the 1-year contract right now. If it comes back through the LTAC, we'll just do an amendment to extend it for 2 additional years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Question.
Yes, one more question.
Can I respond to that question or ask a question about that comment? My understanding was this was going back to the LTAX for consideration, so we don't, then it has to come back to us depending on the LTAX decision. That's where we are.
But the LTAC can't they can't
Yeah,
make the rules.
thank you. I thought you said you were going to rewrite that.
No.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break.
I think we're going to reconvene here, should be able to now. And we are on item number 8A, under contracts and agreements, Clean Water Facility, Carollo Engineers, Consultant Agreement Amendment number 16 for Windjammer Park improvements. We have our city engineer, Joe Stoll.
Mayor, council members, I know it's been a long night, so I'll try to do my best to be entertaining and have fun with this. It's really an exciting part of the project for us. It's actually looking forward to implementing phase 1 of the park improvements. So the agenda, I'll go through the purpose, why we're here, background, and this will show up between every section, so I guess I don't really need to read through every one of them. So the purpose of the agenda bill is to seek council's authorization to allow staff to move forward with design of phase 1 of the park improvements that came out of the Windjammer Park Improvement Plan. So the background, if you remember, if you want to look way back, in August of 2012, we chose Windjammer vicinity as location or general location for the clean water facility. We hadn't picked a particular site at that point, but that kind of set the stage for what we're talking about tonight. And during that time, we talked about how the treatment plant could be a catalyst for other improvements in the area. And that's really important to keep in mind. And in September of 2013, we went through the SEPA process, and we had a mitigated determination of non-significance, which had a bunch of criteria that went along with it, which basically says that work areas that are disturbed need to be restored to like or better condition. So that's an obvious one. You do that on every construction job. The step further is that impacts to the existing park would be mitigated. So if we have we'd reduce access to the basketball courts, restrooms, different features in the park, or we ultimately affect them, like the RV park and different things, that we have to mitigate that effect. So there's some reason why we're going through this effort of doing improvements to the park. We just took it to the next step and say, hey, what's the big plan? And then we're going to bite off the first piece, and that's what we're trying to do today. So in 2015, City Council authorized Amendment 12 with Carollo to work on the Windjammer Park Integration Plan, which was a great move. And we have, through January through May of 2016, we have had a total of 5 citizen advisory group meetings. And that group made up of 18 individuals that spent quite a bit of time doing homework and participating in what they thought the park should be to representing their community. Of those 5 meetings, 2 of them were open to the public, so they could see how the process was moving forward. Our consultants took that back and turned that into a plan, the Windjammer Park Integration Plan, which was adopted by Council in June. So the proposed phase 1. So this map I stole straight out of the Windjammer Park Integration Plan that was adopted in June. And you can see the different phasing lines, and that's kind of at the time what we were thinking would be a good way to break things up. So what we've done with phase 1, this was the initial phase 1 that was proposed, and because it kind of splits up this parking lot, you can see over there by Beeksma. We thought, well, what would happen if we extended a little bit further and actually included this area here? So I know it's a bit more than what the initial phase 1 was shown in the plan, but to me it makes a more complete phase 1 that can kind of stand on its own. But there are ways that we can still work with this and trim things back a little bit if we'd like to match our funding abilities. So our consultant came back, and this graphic's attached to your agenda packet, if you can find it in the 600 or 700 pages of contracts that are in there.
228.
There you go. And this is what our consultant came back with as the proposed limits of the phase 1. Now you'll see that a certain part of it's shaded back, and that's already included in the treatment plant project, clean water facility project already. So we're talking about the rest of it. I know we're going to be talking about cost, overall cost in a minute, and while I have this map up, I'd like to highlight that, this extends clear down to where the kayak, the boat launch is, and the kayak campground. We may not need to go that far if we find that we don't have the funding to do that. It also, the cost estimate includes half-street improvements on Beeksma. It depends on, once we go out to the public and hear back from them what they want to have included, and we balance that with what fundings are available, we'll refine this boundary as we go. So by the numbers, we're dealing with 12 and a half acres. I mean, think about that for a second. That's almost half the park. So it's a substantial amount of property that we're working with. 700 feet of waterfront trail. Splash park's included in the estimate, although we have that listed separately in the budget. There's a playground that would get replaced, hard courts, and that's taking the basketball court and moving it over and actually creating a second one. An events plaza, performing stage, kitchen, bathrooms, 170 parking spaces. So right now there's close to 100 over there just south of the treatment plant, so we'd be adding additional parking, which would be nice in that area. And then wind shelters and a maintenance facility so that our parks crew doesn't have to drive lawnmowers all the way down there to take care of things. So the budget for phase one. So this was I pulled this slide out of one of the presentations we did for the Citizen Advisory Group. And based on, if you took the park plan as a whole, and you took the total cost and divided it by acres, it'd be about $630,000 per acre. And that's what we were working with when we moved the plan forward. So if you took the 12 and a half acres I was talking about by that, you'd be looking at about a $7.9 million project. What that includes is 30% contingency and 10% set aside for design cost. Doesn't include some other items, which I'll show you in just a minute, but that's to give you a scale of what we're looking at. So I know, engineers and spreadsheets. This is me trying to validate kind of where things are at to try and help you understand where this is headed for a total budget that I'm working with. So this is conceptual. The numbers are clearly rounded off. The numbers at the top, clearly rounded. And what I've done is I've gone down the community outreach, design development, construction documents, permitting process, and services during construction, and applied what I felt was a reasonable percentage and tried to get it close to what the scope was that's proposed by Carollo on this. So this particular contract is looking at this box right here. That's all we're looking at. We're not looking at the $9 million. We're looking at about roughly $900,000 for design work, which is about 10%. And that's typical for design contracts. But this gets us all the way through services during construction as well. Does not include archaeology, so we can assume that there'll be an additional cost working with that, especially the area. And the construction cost, all these percentages are based on a conceptual construction cost. So it's, like I say, it's a budget. It's something to give you a frame of reference for where we're headed. So the funding, where are we going to? How is this going to get funded? Well, when you look at, we believe that about half of it should come from the clean water facility, and the reason why is impacts from construction due to the large pile of dirt that's out there, having to close down the kitchen, all those different things that happen. And we've been able to do a preliminary cost estimate to justify that balance. So there's Windjammer Park funds that are left over from previous study. There's community park impact fees. There's park impact fees. There's grant funds that we're already seeking for the splash park. RCO grant funds, REIT 1 and 2, and other sources, other types of grants, civic organizations, possibly fund reserves. It's going to be one of those projects that we're going to have to pull in funding from every source we can think of and talk to everybody we know to make this happen, I think. But I think it's very well worth it. So amendment number 16 to Carollo's contract, which is why the packet's partly so huge, because we include all the different amendments. The scope, I've kind of gone through this already, but they've broken it down into these categories: project management all the way through services during construction. And the team, it's a big team, and because there's a lot of different aspects to it. Clearly, the city of Oak Harbor, that's not just you and me, that's the citizens of Oak Harbor. There's Carollo Engineers, which is lead, and we thought it was pertinent to keep them involved because of the direct correlation to the treatment plant. MWA Architects, which has been involved in the architecture for the clean water facility. Greenworks, also involved in the treatment plant. And Enviro Issues to help with the public outreach portion of this. And then behind the scenes, because of all those different elements that are part of this project, we have geotech, survey, mechanical and electrical engineering, structural, all sub-consultants feeding into this because there's picnic shelters and restrooms and lighting and everything else that goes along with this. So the timeline is pretty swift. So once approved, we'll be going, getting right out of the gate, getting some survey and geotech information and starting the public outreach process. And we're gonna reach out and see what not only to the citizen advisory group that's already participated in this, but to the public at large, and get their feedback on, we have the pieces of the puzzle. Are they organized in the right way? We already know, we've already gone through the process of selecting what pieces there are. Do we have them organized correctly, and does this match what you're thinking, to have them involved in the development? That gets us, all that occurs, and we have preliminary design, which is kind of the pretty picture by March, end of March. So really quick. The goal is that at that point, we move on to developing the design itself and permitting, because you can imagine we'd have, being that in the shoreline environment, that we'd have a fair amount of permitting to go through, get it out to bid so that we can start construction right as we're having startup on the treatment plant. So the goal is to keep Hoffman, as soon as the work weans off on the clean water facility, have it move right into restoring the parks, so that when we're finished with the clean water facility, we've got this beautiful park to go along with it. So just in summary, Phase 1 delivers on the promise to use clean water facility as a catalyst. And this is me just embellishing a bit because I really believe in this, but it's shaped by community feedback. The proposed schedule allows us to follow through with the new treatment plant really well. And it demonstrates that we went through this effort and we take it wholeheartedly. And we're a premier waterfront community, and this park could really bolster that. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I guess we'll ask if the public's got any input at this point. Yes, Mr. Hovey.
Good evening. My name's Hal Hovey. First of all, I really hope that you guys decide to go forward with this, and I want to thank you for keeping the pressure on to make sure that all the work that was put into the Windjammer Park plan doesn't just die on the vine like so many plans in the past have. I do have a couple of questions. One on slide 21, where there was a list of consultants. I just was wondering, does, for example, Greenworks and Hoffman and all that, are they part of this $969,000, or is that going to be separate contracts? And then my second question is, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but does this contract help the city to assess any increased operations and maintenance costs that are going to go along with having a lot of new stuff in the park, newest in terms of age, new stuff in the park that may require more maintenance because it's newer, and we don't want it to deteriorate the way that some of the things that have already deteriorated have, because we haven't spent enough money on maintenance, perhaps. So I'm wondering if this consultant agreement helps to let the city know how much it's going to cost over what we're already spending on Fruit Parks. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, going once, okay, twice. Mr. Stoll, I hope you might be able to address those questions.
I sure can, and yes, the sub-consultants listed are included in the contract.
Okay.
And the second part about operations and maintenance, that is something we can ask the consultant to look into what those costs might be. But that really devolves back to the park budget, the Parks Division's budget, whether they have sufficient funding and staff to manage the improvements.
Council, Mr. Servades, let's start with you.
Thank you. Question, I'm looking at the 10/20/2015 meeting when we approved that amendment from Carollo. Do you and I'm looking at the subtasks, but I can't find it. Their design and the coordination of the Windjammer Park integration plan, do you remember how much money we allocated towards that? I want to say it was like 180 of those subtasks, about 180,000 was allocated towards this effort thus far.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So I support this very much. I think this is one of the few significant tasks or projects that this council has in front of them that can leave a mark, a legacy for our community. We do stuff all the time, infrastructure. No one gets excited about water pipes or a road that is smoother than another road. But I think this is truly an opportunity to do something significant. And we've articulated, as you put up there, that it can be a catalyst for really, truly building community. The question I have, you list enviro issues up there. Nothing against them. I think they've done a phenomenal job. But hasn't the bulk of the community outreach already been done? We've designed the Windjammer Park integration plan with the exception of redrawing the phasing lines and maybe some tweaks as to the actual components. Hasn't most of that work been done? I don't want to have a big budget item allocated for them. Nothing against their work, but I don't know if it's that necessary at this point. Why do you think it is?
Well, we've worked with enviro issues for quite some time now, and they're very effective. And I think it's imperative that we have public buy-in on the improvements that we construct. It's their park. And enviro issues is very, very good at helping draw that feedback in.
But haven't we done that with the charrettes and everything that we've done up to this point?
At a 10,000-foot level, now we're dropping down into the design. And so say, for example, with the splash park, we've identified a potential location for it, but is it nature-type playground or is it water cannons? What kind of slides are there? Do we get the community involved in a community playground? Is it all under, is there just a big swimming pool there, or is it just, what kind of surface is it? What are people looking for with that one particular element? Now multiply that by all the different structures and landscape that occur, and we're trying to make sure we meet their needs.
Okay, and once again, I know Aaron and their crew has done a good job. I just don't want to spend $30,000 on charrettes and work groups when we could spend $30,000 on slides and a pool. So just be conscious of that. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Wassinger?
Joel stole my comment. I had my hand up because I wrote down the same question looking at it, that it seemed like public outreach was a larger part of this. And yes, we, Mr. Hovey and so many worked so hard in that community advisory group. And there were many, open houses and public involvement in that. And I too would hate to see us spend money that we've already spent, on public outreach and getting this beautiful plan done. And so I too would encourage all of us to be conscious of that and know what we've done already and not repeat the same, reinvent the wheel on that. Thank you.
Other, Councilor Allenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I want to chime in on that also because I think we really did have quite an extensive public outreach, but that's just a comment. I have some other questions here. You said Carollo gave you a cost breakdown on this, listing all of the sub-consultants, is that correct?
Yes.
And they listed the sub-consultants' values in there?
They're all broken out. If you turn to page, if I can get my eyes to work.
Well, let me
248.
just move on with the question on this, because I did not get that. I don't have the breakdown on the cost there, but what I wanted to find out, what percentage of all of this work, this $969,000+, what percentage is actually done by Carollo? Not Carollo's subs, not Carollo's administration, but Carollo as an engineering firm.
You know, you're asking a great question, and I'm looking to see if it has it right here. Subtotal Carollo costs $130,000, so maybe 15%, 10-15%.
Okay, now, when we've had our Wednesday meetings, we had some discussions with the staff about this. Why are we using Carollo to do this when we could actually use MWA and Greenworks, or at least the subcontractor, sub-consultants through MWA, who is the architectural firm that would be doing the design work, and the landscape people who come in there? I mean, typically projects are run by the architects. This is not new territory to them. Why are we paying Carollo, a big engineering firm, to manage a site work enhancement project?
You know, that's a really great question. We spent some time talking that over with the consultants to try and figure out the best way to deliver this. And because of how closely this project integrates with the clean water facility, like the clean water facility itself has a water feature that's likely to lead down to the splash park, which crosses the boundaries of the two projects. We felt it was best to keep the team as cohesive as we could moving forward, so we just left it as it is under one contract.
What is Carollo's markup on their consultants?
I think it's 12%.
12% of all of the consultant work, which comes up to about $700,000.
Oh, it wouldn't be set. No.
Well,
it's maybe 70, but I'm not even 100% sure that. I'd have to.
You know, I'm all for doing this park. I like that idea, but by golly, I want value for what we're spending our money on, and we have 969. You know, this is pushing $1 million to do design on this site, which the total fee on this is 12.5%, which includes a 30% contingency. So we're putting a fee on top of a major contingency for somebody who is doing a minor part of the work.
You know, I'd like to. I'm reading this further, and I'm trying to. I want to answer your question here better. So Carollo's fee is 12% of Carollo's cost.
Okay.
So it's just a 12% markup on their
their
cost.
work. What's their markup on their
5%
consultants?
on the sub-consultants.
Okay.
So the total markup on sub-consultants is $38,000.
And you don't think that we could use that $38,000 by going through MWA?
The effort of managing an additional contract.
We have
and-
KBA who is managing the contract activity.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. Problem is that we
Pop
have.
up.
The problem is there's two things that are advantages to where we're going. One is we just can't go to their sub and hire them directly. We'd have to go back and go through a separate procurement process and basically start again with a new consultant and have to open it up for competition. Number two is the coordination. You got to remember that the areas that we're working in are the areas that we have a tremendous amount of design work already done. So while their part of this job is not as extensive as the rest of it, all the mapping, all the dirt work, all the stuff that's being coordinated is still, all phase one is basically the areas we're occupying with construction now. So keeping that integrated is something we have to do. So somebody coming in is going to have to basically pick up the project after we're done.
Okay, and you know, that's a good explanation. Number one, the part about going through the reviewing and going through the process again for another consultant. There goes the savings if we got rid of Carollo, then you lose the continuity with them on the site. So, having said that, I'll shut up.
Thanks, Brett.
It's getting late.
Okay, anyone else want to follow that? Any, Councilor Heisen?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to authorize the mayor to sign contract amendment number 16 with Carollo Engineers.
Second.
So we have a motion by Heisen, second by Servadius to authorize the mayor to sign contract amendment number 16. Question?
I have another question. This is T&M, correct? They have a fee schedule, and this contract is T&M, so it's not a lump sum.
Correct.
That's all I need to know. Thank you.
Any other? Okay. Yes, Councilor Campbell.
Thank you. I'm going to be voting no on this. I don't think we can afford it. People I talk in town don't think that we can afford it. I picture in a water park some mother bringing her little kids down here in about September, and the kids last about 3 seconds because it's too bloody cold. A water park in our park here, I think, is a terrible waste of money. Anyway, that's either here and there. I'm going to vote no. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, you've heard the motion second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we've got a 6-1 vote. And we are done with item number 8A and on to item number 8B. Clean Water Facility, General Contractor, Construction Manager, GMP number 10. Mr. Stoll?
Mayor, council members, this one kind of stands on its own here. It's we're moving forward with the work on the site, and this is the next phase of work we're proposing. So GMP number 10 includes self-performed concrete work, geotech and temporary shoring for the odor control buildings, and I'll show you what that means in a minute. Soil improvements at the solids handling building, so there's some additional 154 stone columns that need to be installed, allowance for compaction grouting, and some core penetrating tests to validate that the density of the soil and the depth to glacial till. So this just the brief summary, like I've shown in previous GMP updates. The direct cost, which is the cost of the construction itself, is $4.8 million. Negotiated support services is relatively small. The risk contingency and owner contingency remain the same percentages as before. And the specified general conditions, there aren't any additional because those have already been addressed in previous GMPs. And the GCCM fee of 4.28% is $220,000, so it takes us to right at $5.4 million before tax, and after tax, $5.8 million. So the self-perform work, I'm going to dive into that like I have in the past, but a bit briefer. The work that we're looking at is Area 50 and 60, we call them, which is biosolids and odor control. And this is concrete work that we originally bid. Didn't have any bidders on it. So we're having a good relationship with Hoffman doing the self-perform work, so we considered that and agreed to bring it forward to council. We also, in addition to what was bid, we've added on the odor control facility. That wasn't in what the bid package that went out on the street before. So the total of the self-performed work without sales tax is $3.3 million. So what all these self-performed packages mean? Just I'm going to run through these real quick. This is a picture from I think it was yesterday of the project site from the window that you'll be, or close to the window you'll be looking out of tomorrow. So the first self-performed packages was the floor and the walls, concrete for those. The second, or GMP number 8, was the second self-performed concrete work, and that was the divider walls for the tanks and the roof and the headworks area. And I guess I want to make sure you're orientated. If you aren't already, you can see the harbor off in the distance, the bank building, we're standing on it, and the crane. You can't miss the crane tonight, so we all know where that's at. So what are we proposing with GMP number 10? It is the odor control facility, which is the structure off to the left. It's, I think, roughly 100 feet by 50 feet by about 8 or 10 feet deep. Maybe deeper, 12 feet deep. There's another concrete slab in blue that's a little bit closer to us on the left side of the screen. That's where the carbon scrubbers will go. And then right close to us, you'll see that concrete slab there, and that's for the electrical room and blowers, and I think that's also going to house the generator pad and stuff like that. And off in the distance, on the other side of the crane, you'll see a pad over there, and that is where the odor control sorry, thank you. Biosolids building will go. And just for orientation, that pad will be right behind the lift station that's out there now. Brett was showing earlier with moving the existing generator to the other side of the building. We're so close to the existing building that we had to move that generator to build that pad. So we're doing everything we can to stay as far north as possible. So when we do any negotiated work like this, we're required to validate the work. So we enlisted the help of KBA, and they, on page 585, if you want to go hunting for it, they've gone through the effort of validating that the cost is reasonable. We've also gone through a lot of, we've already done a lot with Hoffman and have a good track record, and we know kind of where the numbers are falling in. So to negotiate with them for a third time was pretty straightforward. And we're continuing forward with cost accounting, and I'm going to show you a couple slides here in a minute to demonstrate how it's actually been working for us. So the self-perform results to date, so this is up through today. We've had, the original estimate was that by today we would have had about 1,700 yards of concrete poured, and we've actually got 3,200 poured. So they've been doing phenomenal in that metric. The labor hours, they estimated that it would be right around 11,000 hours, and we're a little bit over on hours, but we're even further ahead in actual construction. So the next slide is kind of projecting this all out. So the last one was a static shot. Now this is looking out into the future, and what we're attempting to show here is the original estimate is the blue line on the bottom. And then the red line, up to present, we're seeing some progress for labor resource estimate. And what we hope to do, if things continue along the same trend, is finish with less hours, which means less money for us, and quicker. So 3 months now gains us a month, 2 months later. So anytime we can shorten the schedule, what is it, 5,000 a day, I hear often enough that we're watching that very closely. So summary of the Hoffman contracts to date takes us to $76 million before tax. And that's, you can see we've had a lot of different packages come through at varying amounts. And in the future, we're looking for GMP 11, which would, the intent of that one would be implementation of phase one of the non-process, I'm sorry. GMP 11 is non-process, GMP 12 would be phase one of the park improvements. And that's the end of the presentation. I have with me Trevor Teese and Brian Shirley and clearly my the project manager here, Brett, to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, before we do that, we'll open it up to the public, see if anybody wishes to speak. No? Okay, doesn't look like it. Okay, back to council. Yes, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. You said GMP 11 is non-process, so is that the admin, the southwest corner of what's left to do? Okay.
That's correct. I think in previous updates we've told you we have what is it, 20 packages out to bid right now, 6A through 6T, I think it is. And so that, when those bids come back in, that's the bid open, that's the approval we were looking to bring forward on the December 20th, but we're looking to push that out so we get better bids
Okay.
until beginning of next year.
Thank you. The only other thing up there I couldn't reconcile is on your graph with labor hours estimated a couple slides back. You implied and said we're making progress. I understand finishing early, that makes sense, but are we truly, we're using more labor hours? Is that?
It's actually, we're intending to use 4,000 less labor hours.
Well, these are savings in hours, not hours incurred. I read the graph wrong.
Yes, they're hours incurred, but the red line is the projected, and it's less hours than the blue line, which is longer and more hours.
The way to look at it is.
Hop up so I can hear you.
The way to look at it is, if you look at the previous one, we've done 200% of our concrete for 140% of our labor. And that right now equates to about 1,500 hours today. And at $60 an hour, that's almost $1,500 or $150,000 in savings we're seeing in labor cost.
So tell me if I'm,
Yeah.
this other slide, if I go up the axis, that means more. But if we come back to this one, you're saying the amount of concrete we've poured, we would have estimated it. Let's back up one slide, please.
Yeah.
The amount of concrete, 3,000 and some cubic yards, 3,200 that we've poured, we estimated that would have taken,
Almost 11,000 hours.
and yet we've used,
14,000 hours, but we've poured twice as much concrete. So for, it's very good. So
twice as much work, but not twice as many hours.
yeah.
Just I don't know in my head, as much as I enjoy numbers, I can't get it around that one. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's-
And thank you for the Christmas lights, or the help in the Christmas lights. My kids love them. I think that's pretty cool. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, anyone else? Yes, Councilor Holmberg.
Would you please go back to the other, the following graph, that one right there? So we are at 70,000 what?
Hours.
Those are hours where we're projected 70,000 hours where we could come in at 60,000 hours, 63,000 hours, saving approximately 7,000 hours, whatever that unit cost per hour is the theoretical savings on that, plus the shortening up of the timeline if you perform that way. Okay. Got it.
Councilor Muntz?
I'm ready to make a motion. I authorize the mayor to sign AIA document A13320009 Exhibit A, GMP number 10.
Second.
So we've got a motion to authorize the mayor to sign AIA document A-133, 2009, Exhibit A, GMP number 10. Motion by Munn, second by Allenberg. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That passes unanimously. We are off to item number 8C, and I suppose that's you again, Mr. Stoll.
You know, once they get me up here, it's hard for them to get me to leave. So this I actually pretty much gave the presentation during the consent items for this one. It's pretty brief. It's related to the bridge hanger replacements. Background on it is we selected KBA off of the MRSC roster as the most qualified to provide construction management on the project. Why we chose them is it's night work and we don't have the staff to do the inspection on a project overnight. So they've graciously come in and agreed to sleep all day, I guess. Yeah, so the original scope of work was based on a 30-day schedule that we put in our contract. We've come across a few things that have slowed up the schedule, and so because the original PSA was approved under the mayor's authority under $30,000. Since we're going to exceed that, we're coming back with this amendment to you. That's why you might not remember having seen it before. It's because we didn't bring it to you originally. So amendment number 1 extends the contract 41 days. It's what we're estimating right now based on what we know. It increases the contract by $45,000 to a total of $75,000. And there's a recommended action. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Open it up to public. Anybody? Nope, seeing none. Okay. City Council.
And I should mention I have Kay Adams with KBA here to help with any questions, as well as Arnie Peterschmidt, the project manager.
Councilor Servadius.
Just quick, so in removing the insulation, they discovered the couplings need replaced, and that's more, you can do that easier than just replacing the pipe? How do you replace?
That's a good question. We have yet to figure out. So what we're going to do is explore the one of the couplings that we can get to real easy. We've got a couple proposed fixes to see which one, we haven't settled on which one's the right one to use just yet. But once we implement that, we'll know more about the quality of the existing steel pipe and how well that particular fix worked. And from that, we'll be able to develop a better estimate of what it's going to take to repair the other 13 of the couplings.
Okay, that's all at the moment. Thank you.
Councilor Holmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. So, $45,000 on top of $30,000, and we don't know what we're going to do with the pipe based on the discovery of doing that exploratory work. How do we get to the $45,000 if we don't know what we're going to do? Are we doing this backwards?
Well, it's kind of a two-step. That's we got to do some exploration before we can come up with what the ultimate fix is. And I can't do the exploration and have somebody there to watch it without KBA's support. So it's kind of like I need both. So what my hope is, let me take a step back. We worked with KBA on several occasions. If the concern is that we're approving 41 days and 45,000 and they're going to use all of that up, that's not the case. They've always come in under budget, and the reason why they've ever gone over, like in this case, is because the project's demanded it or it's something the city's asked them to do.
That doesn't answer my question. The question is, we don't know for sure what the extent of the investigation is going to be at the hangars and the insulation. How did we come up with a price for what they are going to do? It's $45,000 to inspect one hangar during the investigation?
What we base the estimate on is what a predicted schedule of what it would take if everything went well.
What's everything went well?
That means replacing all the couplings across all 14 of the couplings.
Okay, so they're assuming that they have to do an inspection for all of the couplings, even without doing the investigation.
That's correct. We're just making our best guess at this point. They charge us time and materials, and if we get through the first coupling and decide that we're not going to take it any further, then that's the end of it. If we get out there and we look at the coupling and say the pipe needs to be replaced, well, then we'll need to reevaluate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Councilor Servadius? Oh, a question? Oh.
I just move it along. I move to authorize the mayor to sign the professional services amendment number 1 with KBA Inc. in the amount of $45,000, increasing the total contract amount from $29,985 to $74,985.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion by Servadius, second by Heisen, as is up on the screen there. So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
We are to item number 8D. Approval of contract with Mcgrath Human Resources Group for a comprehensive classification and compensation study for all non-represented employees.
Thank you, Jim.
And we've got our HR Director, Emma House, here.
Good evening, Council. So, a little bit of background. We have started the process to do our classification and compensation study. It hasn't been done in about 12 years. We put the request for proposals out in August. We unfortunately didn't have any successful proposals at that time, and so we redid the process and we went out and rebid for proposals again. Luckily, we did get 4 complete proposals this time. The bids ranged from $20,000 up to $70,000, so we were kind of not sure what range we were going to fall under and whether we would need your approval to move forward. The recommendation is actually to go with the firm that came in at $21,000, which is under the $30,000 mark. The contract proposal is attached to the agenda bill. It definitely covers the areas that we were looking to cover to review all of the non-represented positions, the compensation and salary and benefits for those positions, and make sure that we are in alignment with the market. And this follows our Oak Harbor Municipal Code underneath the compensation section, which is 2.34.080. And so mainly we wanted to bring this forward as an informational packet because we don't really need your approval, but we would like to have your approval to move forward, knowing that we would like to award the contract to Mcgrath Human Resources Group. Any questions?
Okay, let's ask the public. Doesn't look like, no, they don't have any public input. Council, questions, input?
No.
Any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, because I won't say we, I at least have joked, hey, we need a raise, or people say, you guys need a raise. Would something like this ever incorporate a council and/or mayor compensation?
Yes, the council and the mayor positions are on the list of positions to be reviewed.
Super, thank you.
Yes. All of the non-represented positions, so anything that's not covered underneath the current union contract.
Councilor Omberg.
Thank you. But it's my understanding that no sitting elected official can receive a raise or compensation increase during their term.
Right. The study would basically give us a recommendation to make sure that we're in alignment internally, equitably. So there would not be any changes possibly at any time. It would be a recommendation for a classification plan for the entire city.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Input? Okay, I guess we don't require any kind of action. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Emma, we
Have a good
appreciate
night.
it. Nicely done. And we are on to our last item of the evening. Discussion of setting non-represented city employees' annual COLAs to Consumer Price Index. And Mr. Merriman, I guess you mentioned that was brought forward at our last meeting by Councilor Wassinger, so we'll give her the stage.
Oh, I didn't realize I had a stage.
Well,
it's so late too, especially at 10 o'clock on the dot at night. So I'll just make this brief. I know it is late. So I am in looking at, again, our code 2.34, the same one that Ms. House mentioned. It says that at the time of adoption of the wage and salary schedule, the City Council shall decide whether to set a cost of living adjustment or COLA for regular employees not subject to the collective bargaining agreement, so non-represented employees. And looking back, and as Ms. Soul mentioned, right now it's budgeted in our preliminary budget to just have a straight 2% salary increase for non-represented employees. The council hasn't set in a resolution any sort of basing a COLA on an index of any sort, an inflationary or consumer price index at all. And in fact, the last one I think was done in 2009 that basically set it at a minimum of 2% for wages for 2010. So I think it's time. I think for me, it's the most important thing is having this cost of living adjustment live up to its name and be set to a consumer price index. I think that's important for transparency to our taxpayers and to our citizens, and I think it's just something that the council, that us as a council should look into doing. There's several different ways to calculate a consumer price index. There's a federal rate that's set by the federal government, and that applies to all of our Social Security earners, retired military pensions, military retirees in general, and that is released every October, and they have a very methodical way that they calculate that. I think it would be very easy for us to use that. There's also a Seattle, Bremerton, Tacoma price index that's maybe a more regional way to look at it. Now, I think it's important that we do this. I know we're in the 11th hour of approving our budget for the next 2 years, so I would like to have staff maybe bring to us for this budget a consumer price index that they feel is appropriate, and one that maybe we can think about using that would be appropriate to adopt in this budget. And going forward, I wouldn't be opposed to amending our municipal code to say, this is just the way it is going forward, not that we have to approve it every biennium budget. I would entertain that as well. I think that may be something that could be done, or just leave it and do the same exercise every budget cycle. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, and why I thought it was important, and that's my stage.
Okay, very well done. I agree it is important, so. Yes, Councillor Heisen, question?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree. I think this is an excellent suggestion. 2% seems to just kind of be the standard default COLA everywhere. And I guess I've never questioned why that is, but I mean, it could just be a completely arbitrary number. So having a COLA based on something specific would be, Doug to the rescue, would make sense to me. Maybe the 2% is it, but I mean, more information is never a bad thing. So being the 11th hour, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable implementing that right away, but it's worthy of discussion.
Councillor Munn.
Just a comment. We have other groups of our employees that have something built in, and I think we need to give the respect and to back our employees that aren't in one of those groups.
Right.
As we've done, we've kind of defaulted with just 2%. And to really know why we're making a decision and what, it would be great to have the information and a suggestion from staff on what would be appropriate. But I think we need to give all our employees the respect that they deserve. And we've kind of, in some ways, slept off this group. And I think it was a good idea that Councilman Wassinger brought up. So very much so would love to see something brought back at some time.
Councillor Omberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a, Mr. Merriman, Dr. Merriman, is there an index or a fraction thereof that represents the inflationary value in this area that you know of?
There's a couple different things you can look at. The 2% number we came up, it wasn't a dart thrown at a target. What it was the average of the CPIW Seattle area and the CPIW national. The Seattle area was about 2.2%, and the national was about 1.8%. So we averaged those two, and then we called our surrounding cities that we compete with for labor. Anacortes was at 2%, and Mount Vernon was at 2%. So we used that number as the 2% for this budget process so far.
Okay, so it wasn't a default number that we
No.
just popped up with then?
No, we did it that way. One thing that might be good is to, and this is just an idea, we can bring this forward and talk about it some more, but find a good index to use for that for future budget cycles. One of the things, it is the 11th hour. It would take a tremendous amount of work to go back and recalibrate. Say if we were to do a 1.9% COLA or something like that, it might be a suggestion of looking at it for future years, but not go back and redo the whole budget for this right now at this time. But I know what the intent is and the idea, and we can find a way to incorporate that in our policy going forward on COLAs.
Okay, just a comment about what we did tonight. We had ordinance 1777, 1785 regarding the property tax increase, and that's based on the IPD. That's the, the price deflator index that you go by. So we're telling the public that yes, we're going to raise your property taxes based on this index. Why aren't we considering that for our own needs for non-represented employees?
As Patricia pointed out, the IPD is a measure of gross consumer spending. It can be on products, it can be on goods and services.
Okay.
It's not a wage base. The CPI-W, the W stands for wage earners and clerical workers.
Okay.
So it's based on compensation values in our area.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councilor Wassinger.
Yeah, I wanted a clarification on the 2% that was come up with for our current budget cycle that we're about to adopt. So I read that the June to June Seattle CPIW change was 2%, but then the federal COLA that was just released for Social Security, it was released just a few weeks back, and it was 0.3.
Yeah.
So I don't think that quite adds up to an average of 2%. Can you clarify?
And the one I referred to is the CPIW for the national index. That is different than the CPI you're referring to that they use for Social Security and federal disability and those things like that.
Okay, just to be clear, that the 0.3 is what all of our Social Security recipients and retirees are getting. So I just want to make sure that that's out there. And I think we need to value greatly what that part of our population is receiving.
Yeah, we didn't get a raise this year.
Social Security or the military did not get a raise this year.
Councilor Serbadius.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought this up. I do support looking into this. One of the themes that kept coming back or recurring at the Leavenworth Finance and Budgeting Conference was having financial policies in general, not just financial policies. So you have a concrete policy on which to base your decisions. I want to be able to offer the most competitive wages and benefits possible. One of the things I was just looking at, the graphs that Ms. Soul showed us tonight, when you look at our general fund, and 60 to 70% of that is personnel, if that's including wages and benefits, forget benefits because medical premiums will go up, 5 to 10%. But if wages are going up at 2, and as Mr. Allenberg pointed out, we can only, wherever we can find funds, and if we're capped at 1%, that math doesn't work long term to make a sustainable general fund. So I would support looking at this, and we want to be as competitive as possible, both with wages and benefits.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Allenberg.
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Motion made to adjourn. Allenberg, second. Campbell, all in favor, say aye.
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 Don't anybody oppose, nobody, any opposed? Yeah.